At the beginning of everything, chaos took over the universe. It was then that, from a primordial mass, the gods created the sky and the earth. These divine spirits, noticing the world was empty, gave rise to two new deities. Their names were Izanagi and Izanami. The divine couple's mission was to fill the world and create everything that would exist in it. Izanagi and Izanami received a divine spear from the hands of the primordial kami. This artifact was ornamented with precious jewels and possessed remarkable powers. Making use of this instrument, they went to the Celestial Bridge, where they created the sacred island of Onogoro. The two gods worked under the utmost harmony and fell in love due to the proximity. The goddess Izanami invited her husband to consummate the union and generate a noble offspring. Izanagi accepted the invitation. But from this union, deformed creatures were born, given that the ritual of the union of the divine couple was distorted, because proposing was not the role of the female deity. The couple decided to unite again, but this time Izanagi took the initiative and invited the goddess to conduct the ritual of the union. Izanagi and Izanami gave birth to a new generation of gods, and soon created the other islands of the Japanese archipelago. But a tragedy struck the divine couple. Izanami was pregnant again, but something seemed wrong. Izanami passed away, giving birth to Kagusuchi, the god of fire. She had to leave for Yomi, the world of the dead. Her husband did not accept such a fate and left to bring her back from the underworld. This was an impure place, consumed by corruption and filled with oni and corrupt creatures. The god found his beloved wife in the darkness and wanted to bring her with him. But when Izanagi pointed the light to Izanami, he was horrified. The goddess was in an advanced process of decomposition. Her divine purity had been destroyed by rot. Izanami had fed on the fruits of the underworld, and her bond with Yomi was unbreakable. Izanagi, horrified, repudiated Izanami. Furious, she ordered monsters to go after the god, and Izanagi ran away from the world of the dead. He blocked the exit of the underworld with a massive rock, holding Izanami forever in Yomi. Izanagi's visit to the world of the dead made him feel filthy, and he needed to be purified. The god began to take a ritualistic bath. During it, he gave birth to several deities and spiritual beings, like kami and yokai. The god's eyes burned with sadness, and between the tears of Izanagi's left eye, Amaterasu emerged, the brightest divinity that ever existed. Her brightness illuminated everything around her. From the right eye of Izanagi, another remarkable deity emerged. His name was Tsukiyomi, who, although was not as bright as his sister, had a charming luminosity. Finally, dripping from Izanami's nose appeared the agitated and indomitable Susanoo. The creator god, contemplating his last three children, was proud, and he called them the Three Noble Children. Tsukiyomi and Amaterasu were quite close and were often seen together. During those moments, when looking at the sky, it was possible to see the sun and the moon shining together. There was no distinction between day and night. The glorious goddess Amaterasu was invited to a banquet by Ukemochi, the goddess of food. But Amaterasu could not attend. She asked his brother Tsukiyomi to represent her at the banquet. The lunar god encountered a table full of the most diverse foods. The goddess Ukemochi appeared from behind a rock with even more treats. Tsukiyomi wondered where these foods came from, given that, right after the goddess hid behind the rock with her empty tray, she quickly re-emerged on the other side with the tray full of food. Curious, the god decided to spy on what was happening behind the stone, and he was shocked. Ukemochi threw up the rice she was going to serve. From her ears, she grabbed vegetables and roots. Milk flowed from her nose, and unworthy holes also produced food. Tsukiyomi was disgusted and offended by that grotesque scene and proceeded to cut the food goddess with his sword. Her pieces were thrown from the sky, and the most diverse vegetables were born where they hit the ground. Amaterasu was furious to hear about the violence perpetrated by her brother while he was representing her. The goddess expelled her brother to the other side of the world. From this day on, they were hardly seen together in heaven. And so, where Tsukiyomi was, Amaterasu was not. It was now day and night. Izanagi considered that his mission to fill the world was accomplished at last, but before leaving for the high plane of heaven, he gave his daughter Amaterasu a beautiful necklace filled with mystical jewels. From that moment on, she would reign over the heavens during the day and illuminate the whole world. Tsukiyomi would take over the night, and as a lunar deity, he would rule the night and the tides. The impetuous Susanoo received the domain of the seas and storms. The gods recognized how glorious the goddess Amaterasu was, acclaimed as the new lady of the heavenly plains. She stood above the other gods. But Susanoo was angered to see her sister named the most important deity. Unfazed by it, he started to foster several problems. He made rivers dry, and the green vegetation of the sacred mountains began to dry up and die. Izanagi noticed the chaos his son was creating, and asked why he was acting that way. Susanoo revealed how frustrated he was at not being given such an important role as his sister. He declared that he no longer wanted to be in this world. He preferred to leave for the kingdom of the dead and stay beside Izanami, his mother. Izanagi was enraged to hear that his son preferred to live in the unclean underworld. The god expelled his son and told him to never return. Before leaving, Susanoo wanted to make one last visit to his sister. In her heavenly abode, Amaterasu noticed the sound of thunder and an impending storm. She knew that such a thing could only be his impetuous brother. He probably wanted to take her place. Amaterasu tied her hair in 2 large bunches and assumed her battle position. Upon arriving, Susanoo was amazed by Amaterasu's imposing and powerful stance. Her sister questioned the reason for the visit, and Susanoo assured her that he had no bad intentions whatsoever. But Amaterasu didn't trust her brother. To prove that he spoke the truth and that his intentions were pure, Susanoo gave her his sword. The gods decided to creatively compete. Amaterasu broke Susanoo's sword into 3 pieces, and from these pieces, she created 3 female deities. Susanoo used Amaterasu's jewelry beads to create 5 male deities. The impetuous god cherished his victory against the great goddess, since he had created more deities. But the clever Amaterasu contested her brother's victory because he had created life from the goddess's jewels. Therefore, these 5 deities would be the sons of the luminous deity, and the 3 female deities born from Susanoo's sword would be the daughters of his brother. Therefore, she was the actual winner of the clash. Susanoo was outraged by her sister's interpretation and began to thrash the domains of the solar goddess. The stormy god did all sorts of mischief, destroying the sacred rice fields. He entered his sister's palace and made a huge mess. But the worst was yet to come. In Amaterasu's domains, there was a building in which the sacred weavers wove the gods' clothes and cloaks. Susanoo wanted to scare the weavers. He opened a hole in the roof of the weaver's room and made one of Amaterasu's sacred ponies fall from the sky. The weavers felt so scared that one of them ended up having an accident and dying. Amaterasu, when she saw her fields destroyed, her palace emptied, and even worse, having lost one of her beloved weavers, was taken by a massive wave of sadness. The luminous goddess gave up her tasks, entered a cave, and blocked the entrance with a huge stone. Night took hold of the skies, and sunlight was no more. Both the heavenly plane and the land of men were taken by darkness, and the first winter began. The other gods saw the world wither around them. The vegetation was no longer healthy, the animals began to perish, and evil spirits were on the loose. The deities knew that something needed to be done to get Amaterasu out of her cave. They tried to convince her, but she had made up her mind. The wise god Omoekane realized they couldn't get her out by persuasion, but they could by cunning nonetheless. A sacred mirror was devised by the great celestial blacksmith, and a party was arranged in front of the cave's entrance where Amaterasu was hiding. They planted Sasaki, the sacred 500-branch tree, right in front of the cave exit and hung the beautiful mirror on it. From inside the cave, Amaterasu heard a cock crow. How could it be possible if the world was taken by darkness, she thought. Soon after, she heard drums. There seemed to be a party outside. The goddess was right. Several gods gathered and watched the goddess Ame no Uzume dance. The dancing goddess was attempting striptease, much to the gods' frenzy. They reacted with loud laughter. Amaterasu was captivated by curiosity and wondered how they could be so happy. She decided to open the entrance of the cave just a bit to spy what was happening. To her surprise, the gods had found a new goddess of light to worship. She looked so beautiful that Amaterasu decided to leave the cave to see her up close. When Amaterasu came out of her hiding, she brought the light back to the world. The darkness was pushed away, evil beings hid, and joy took over the world. The strong god, Ame no Tajikaro, pushed the stone back to its place, preventing the goddess from returning to the cave. At last, Amaterasu realized that the beautiful bright goddess was her own reflection. She took notice of how splendid and great she was. It wasn't right to deprive the world of her luminousness. The gods cherished the goddess's return, and the world was wrapped in joy. But these same gods didn't forget that Susanoo was the real culprit for that whole conundrum. As punishment, they cut off his beard and pulled out his nails. Finally, they threw him out of the god's house. Susanoo went down to earth near the river Hii in the Izumo province. The stormy god was lonely, and he went down the river on two trunks, looking for someone in that vast world. On the riverbanks, he found an elderly couple alongside a beautiful maiden. They were deeply sad and cried profusely. Susanoo wanted to know the reason for such dismay. The old man explained that he once had 8 daughters, but every year a massive dragon would appear and take one of his daughters as a tribute. Only one remained. The beast would not take long to return to take his last gem. The god was marveled by the beauty of the old man's daughter and promised to protect her. But he asked the hand of the beautiful young woman to be his wife. The girl's parents were deeply grateful and honored accepting Susanoo's request. The god had a huge challenge, because he wouldn't face some random creature, but the powerful dragon Yamata no Orochi. This was a giant and powerful dragon, with 8 heads and 8 tails. Even the powerful stormy god would be no match for the dragon if he tried to fight it. Susanoo did not feel intimidated by the challenge and came up with a strategy to defeat the beast. To protect her beloved, Susanoo transformed the beautiful Kushina Dahime into a comb and put it on his head to hold his hair. The earth trembled as the giant dragon emerged to claim his tribute. The beast shrieked and demanded his sacrifice. He then noticed that a peasant filled 8 barrels with the pure sake. The peasant told the dragon that it was an offering to the glorious creature who always conquered everything he wanted. Flattered, Yamata no Orochi accepted the offering, and each of his heads consumed a barrel. The dragon got drunk with such a marvelous beverage and fell asleep. Taking advantage of the beast's vulnerability, Susanoo broke his disguise, drew his sword, and attacked the creature. When the beast awoke, one of its heads was already gone. Enraged, the dragon tried to devour Susanoo. The stormy god dodged his attacks and struck back with lightning and sword blows. Susanoo was cutting the dragon's heads, one after the other. Without any of his heads, the dragon was defeated, but his body was still fighting. Susanoo struck a powerful blow, hitting the dragon's tail, but his powerful sword got broken. Inside the monster's tail, there was hidden an invaluable sacred sword known as Kusanagi. Susanoo, acknowledging the artifact's massive value, knew exactly what to do with it. The god of the seas and storms went to meet Amaterasu. The god knelt before the sun goddess and offered her the glorious sword as an apology for every mischief he had caused. Amaterasu, already an unparalleled goddess, became even more splendid when she carried the famous Kusanagi sword. Susanoo left to meet Kushinada Hime, his new wife. They built a massive palace and had numerous and prosperous offspring. Amaterasu also had a glorious descent. Among them were the men who conquered Japan. They fought in the name of the sun. And, with the strong brightness of the goddess on their backs, Amaterasu's descendants subdued their enemies. Jimmu, Japan's first emperor, was a direct descendant of the sun goddess and was under her protection. The Yamato dynasty, founded by Jimmu, would guide Japan to a story of glory, courage, and pride. Japan is a land of enormous beauty and culture. It is the land of the legendary samurai warriors. The samurai is a recurring figure in today's culture, but what was their role in ancient Japanese society? The word samurai means the one who serves. That was their main role, to serve a feudal lord or even the emperor. Initially, the samurai collected taxes from the peasants. This work was not always peaceful. Therefore, the samurai began to use weapons and practice martial arts. They were also allowed to execute low-class citizens if they refused to pay the taxes required. The main duties of the samurai were to protect their lord's assets, to preserve order and customs, and to be loyal to their sovereign. Their growing influence increased respect for the samurai class, even being feared and hated by some citizens. Over time, many samurai accumulated wealth and land, but they were still considered an inferior class by the nobility. With the increase in land disputes, feudal lords hired more and more warriors as samurai. These feudal lords were known as daimyo and obeyed only the emperor. In 1185, many feudal lords went to war, and after many battles, Minamoto no Yoritomo was the winner. Minamoto received the title of shogun, great commander of the army, and all other feudal lords were forced to swear loyalty to him. Thus, the first military dictatorship of Japan was born, the Kamakura shogunate. During this period, the samurai class acquired military functions and its authority became even greater. Simply looking a samurai in the eye, or soiling his clothes, could cost the life of a peasant. To secure their place in society, many samurai married women from noble families. Their children were trained from childhood as their successors when they reached maturity. Rich and powerful families of samurai were born. They were trained to fight either armed or unarmed. These ancient martial arts gave rise to judo, karate, aikido, and many other modern martial arts. Part of the payment to the samurai was made in sacks of rice, since this was the most important food of the time. After 400 years of relative peace, Japan entered a new turbulent period. The central government was weakened. Many feudal lords went to war again, seeking to achieve military control over the whole of Japan. This phase of the conflict became known as the Sengoku Jidai, period of states at war, or period of civil war. It was the most troubled civil war in Japanese history. This was the period when the samurai were most prominent. Many men from different social classes fought hard on the battlefields in the hope of being recognized and given the title of samurai. The famous Miyamoto Musashi was one of them, having participated in the Battle of Sekigahara. As warriors of the nobility, the samurai fought mainly on horseback. The primary weapon was the bow and arrow. Later, they used the spear. The sword was only used when there were no options left. Only samurai and nobles could have two swords on their waists. The long sword, the famous katana, had great financial and symbolic value. The sword was considered the soul of the samurai. The short sword was known as the wakizashi, wielded when the samurai entered closed environments. The short sword was ideal for narrow or tight places. In these environments, it was more advantageous than the katana. Having these two swords at the waist was a great symbol of status. The armor worn by the samurai was lacquered wood, silk, and small metal plates. These armors were relatively light and allowed a wide range of movement without compromising the defensive part. Helmets were the heaviest item. They were made of only metal and had the most varied ornaments. Some armor was created in order to intimidate enemies. Finding a samurai on the battlefield was probably a terrifying experience. During the Sengoku Jidai, the situation in Japan became complicated, with hunger, disease, and fires affecting the population. Many feudal lords feared that their warriors had become too aggressive and ambitious. In order to control and discipline the samurai, the Bushido was created, a code of honor that the warrior should follow. Bushido means the path of the warrior. The code of conduct was based on the fusion of several Oriental philosophies, coming from religions such as Buddhism and Shintoism. Bushido valued justice, courage, compassion, respect, honesty, honor, and duty. Samurai should also learn calligraphy, painting, and various activities related to self-control and self-improvement. For most samurai, honor was more important than life itself. Life ends, but the name and reputation are remembered for generations. The symbol of the samurai became the cherry blossom, a flower of great beauty, but which appears only once a year and lasts a few days. Such should be the life of a samurai, to live the present, to serve his daimyo, and to leave this world at his peak. Of course, some only sought fame and power. Acts of betrayal also used to occur with some frequency. Tokugawa Ieyasu was the winner of the Battle of Sekigahara, initiating the Tokugawa shogunate. It was a new era of peace that lasted almost 300 years in Japan. With the end of the wars, the samurai caste declined. Many lost their masters or were simply fired. Some committed suicide through the ceremony designated as seppuku, feeling disgraced at the loss of their social status. Others chose to be merchants or policemen. Many became Ronin, wanderers. This term was used to refer to the samurai without a master, who walked without a clear direction in Japan. They accepted jobs as mercenaries, bodyguards, and even constituted criminal groups. Japan passed much of its history closed to foreign countries, maintaining restricted commercial relations. But in 1854, this began to change. Due to a severe financial and commercial crisis, Japan was forced to open its ports for trade with foreign nations. This brought many novelties and improvements to Japan. However, many citizens, mainly from samurai families, were unhappy with the changes in the traditional Japanese lifestyle. All these changes led to the Meiji Restoration, a period that was marked by samurai resistance against the new government model. During the Meiji Restoration, the samurai caste was officially extinct. The last representatives were forced to surrender their swords. Those who refused were arrested and punished. The era of the samurai had come to an end. During the Second World War, the Japanese government propagandized to exalt the samurai spirit. The aim was to encourage the people and to keep the soldiers active on the front line. To help restore the samurai spirit, Japanese officers received swords similar to those used by the ancient samurai warriors. However, they were mass-produced, and their quality was not at all compared to the katanas, which are true works of art. In modern Japan, many samurai families continue to exist. Their code of honor and martial arts continue to be practiced by people all over the world. Therefore, the glory of the warriors of the rising sun is eternal. In ancient Japan, there were many wars between powerful and ambitious feudal lords. These wars were mainly fought on the battlefields. But not only that, there was a world of shadows and furtivity. Only highly trained men and women could enter it. These fearsome shadow warriors were known as ninjas. The origin of the ninjas is obscure as their very existence. They arose around the 12th century at the beginning of the Kamakura shogunate. The word ninja was not always used to designate these secret agents. The most common term was shinobi, which means the one who hides. In the beginning, ninjas were just spies. They pretended to be ordinary people, walking the streets and talking naturally to citizens in order to obtain valuable information. Many of these agents pretended to be merchants, blacksmiths, artisans, and even monks. They used many disguises to accomplish their goals. After all, nothing drew more attention than someone dressed in black and wearing a mask. Some became so skilled at pretending to be ordinary people that they spent years or even their entire lives as spies without arousing any suspicion. With the increase of political intrigue in feudal Japan, ninjas became increasingly in demand. On the other hand, security in castles and other important areas increased. Many of these places were guarded by very skilled samurais. The art of spying became incredibly risky. Many ninjas were executed after being captured. The ninjas became specialists in various martial arts. These arts are known as taijutsu. They mix judo, jiu-jitsu, aikido, karate, and kung fu, all adjusted to become serious injuries and put the opponent out of combat as quickly as possible. But this was not enough to secure the safety of the ninjas, and weaponry training was also included. Ninjas specialized in the use of many different weapons. Most of them were sneaky, used in enclosed spaces such as rooms or corridors. The dreadful makibishi was one of those weapons. Small pointed iron junctions thrown against the ground when ninja was chased. Very difficult to see in the dark, they caused serious damage when stepped on. They were very effective against horse-ridden pursuers. They could also carry a weapon called kusarigama, consisting of a small sickle and attached to a chain with a metallic weight at the other end. Kusarigama was a difficult weapon to use and even more difficult to fight against. It had an enormous range. It could do a lot of damage with its chain, and if that failed, the sickle was used. Tekogaki were weapons used in risks, especially effective in hand-to-hand combat. The classic shurikens and kunais were not thrown to kill the enemy, but to wound him and leave him out of combat. They were thrown in sequence, seeking to reach vital points on the body. Contrary to the common idea, the swords used by ninjas had no straight blade. Many carried normal wakizashis or even katanas. Many ninjas also used chain mail under their kimono to ensure their protection. Ultimately, they could throw a smoke bomb to blind the enemy and escape to ensure their safety in the shadows. Ninja training began as a child. In addition to fighting techniques, they had to learn how to hide their presence in the most diverse environments. They also needed to master survival tactics in the forest, learn how to climb cliffs and walls, and resist hunger and sleep. To be masters in art, the ninjas needed to learn the various accents of different Japanese regions. The use and manipulation of gunpowder or poisons was also something delicate and deadly. The ninjas did not follow the Bushido. They had their own code of conduct and ways of facing life and death. The information about this code of conduct is not very precise. It's in a document known as Bansen Shukai. The training also included meditation and breathing techniques, in addition to a practice called Kuji-kiri. It consisted of creating manual signs symbolizing elements such as fire, wind, water, earth, lightning, among others. Kuji-kiri allowed ninja to focus his mind and even distract his enemies. These new skills led to ninjas being chosen for assassination and sabotage missions. This work was considered dishonorable and dirty by most of the samurai and the general population. The ninjas were people despised by society, but vital agents. During the Sengoku Jidai period, the ninjas emerged as a serious threat. They were hired as mercenaries and killed many generals, samurai, and nobles during the war. They also infiltrated castles. Inside them, they caused fires, poisoned the water or food wells. They even placed bombs, destroying the gates of the castle and allowing the entrance of soldiers. There were also female ninja, the kunoichi. Their main role was to infiltrate, where they pretended to be cooks or housekeepers to enter the castles and fortresses. The most beautiful could pretend to be geishas, the famous luxury courtesans. This allowed them to get even closer to their targets. These ninja arts became known as ninjutsu. Many ninjas even fought openly on the battlefields, causing terror and confusion with their unusual tactics. During the Sengoku Jidai, some ninja families emerged, specialized in different secret arts. Two of these families had great prominence, forming powerful clans. The Iga Ryu clan, the school or tradition of Iga, resided in the province of Iga, a mountainous area that was difficult to access at that time. The clan Koga Ryu, the school or tradition of Koga, was in the province of Omi, a humid region interrupted by rivers. Differences in terrain and environment allowed these two clans to create their own spying tactics. These two ninja clans fought a secret war. Their members ambushed each other, not only because they were hired to do so, but also to eliminate rivals in order to control the espionage networks. With this increase in ninja activities, many became legendary warriors. The most famous was Hattori Hanzo, real name Hattori Masanari. Hattori Hanzo was born in the province of Iga, and, as was the tradition of his clan, was trained as a child in the arts of ninjutsu. At the age of 16, he was employed as a samurai in the service of Tokugawa Ieyasu. Hanzo was a master in the use of the spear. His bravery and savagery on the battlefield made him known as Oni no Hanzo, the Devil Hanzo. One of Hanzo's greatest contributions was the rescue of the wife and son of Tokugawa, who had been hostages. Thanks to Hattori Hanzo, Tokugawa managed to survive the Sengoku Jidai and achieve the shogun title. With the end of the wars, the ninja clans became a serious concern of the feudal lords. These clans had accumulated much information about members of the nobility, trade routes, and government fraud. In order to control these clans and to end disputes between them, the shogun Tokugawa Yoshimune, 8th shogun of the Tokugawa lineage, created the Oniwa Banshu. The Oniwa Banshu was a secret organization with members of the Iga and Koga clans, serving the shogunate. Its main role was to spy on feudal lords to prevent rebellion or corruption. This organization existed officially until the beginning of the Meiji Restoration. It is believed that some members were sent to the United States to spy on the US government. During the Meiji Restoration, samurai and ninja family members were banned from carrying weapons, and in an attempt to end these families, the Japanese government imposed heavy taxes on them. This caused many to flee to other parts of Japan, changing their last name. During this period, the image of the ninjas as practicing warriors of magic became popular in Japan and the West. Stories about ninjas able to fly, able to run over water, or able to shoot fire with their hands filled the imagination of many people. During the Japanese invasion of Manchuria in 1931, some ninjas were recruited again to spy on the Chinese government. The ninjas were never officially extinct, and some families kept the old names of their ancestors. It's perfectly possible that ninjas are still among us nowadays, watching our world as hidden warriors. The samurai were the most important caste of warriors in feudal Japan. The bravery and loyalty of these elite warriors were legendary. But, even among them, some stood out for their martial achievements or skills as commanders of troops in battlefields. Minamoto no Yoshitsune was a great samurai and member of the Minamoto clan. He was the 9th son of the Minamoto lineage who fought a war against the Taira clan for control of Japan. After an unsuccessful rebellion against the Taira clan, which had greater military power, Yoshitsune's 2 older brothers were liquidated. Yoshitsune, still a baby, was sent to be raised in a temple on Mount Hiei near the city of Kyoto. Legend has it that, in his youth, Yoshitsune fled from the supervision of temple monks towards the mountains, where he learned the art of the sword from a supernatural creature known as Tengu. When he came of age, Yoshitsune became a great general. Under his command, the Minamoto destroyed the Taira clan, initiating the first shogunate in Japanese history, the Kamakura shogunate. Kusunogi Masashige is one of the main symbols of loyalty in samurai history. Kusunoki lived during the Kamakura shogunate and served the Emperor Go-Daigo. Between the years 1324 to 1339, there was a civil war between the imperial government and the forces of the shogunate. Kusunoki fought numerous battles in defense of the imperial family, but the enemies were many and determined, having managed to defeat the imperial army. The emperor and his family found refuge on Mount Hiei. Knowing that they would be found and surrounded, Kusunoki gathered the last 700 warriors loyal to the emperor, and, running down Mount Hiei, he advanced against a far greater number of enemies. Kusunoki Masahige died in that battle with his brother. With his sacrifice, he allowed the emperor to escape the impending siege. Tomoe was born around the year 1157 into a family of samurais. She was trained since childhood to use bow and arrow and the naginata, a heavy spear capable of knocking down a horse. In addition to being a fearsome warrior, Tomoe had the reputation of being a beautiful woman, in a perfect combination of beauty and danger. Tomoe fought in heavy armor. She was always present at the most dangerous points of battle. Her end is uncertain. Some say she died next to her husband during a battle. Others claim that she ended her days living as a Buddhist nun. Date Masamune was one of the most iconic samurai in the Edo period. During his childhood, Masamune contracted smallpox, an infectious disease that caused the loss of his right eye. Although the lack of an eye was a serious problem for a warrior, it was not enough to stop Masamune. He became an active and ambitious young man. At the age of 14, he participated in his first battle, helping his father lead the attack against a rival clan. At the age of 18, he was already a feared and respected samurai. He was identifiable on the battlefield. He wore a helmet with an ornament in the shape of a crescent moon. Masamune was the victim of a poisoning attempt by his own mother. She thought her son's behavior was too raucous and wanted his younger brother to be the heir. Masamune survived this terrible attack and killed his brother, securing his position as the daimyo. He was nicknamed Tokugawa, the Eye Dragon. Date Masamune spent his entire life in battle. He accumulated great wealth, capturing castles and fertile lands. He became famous for allowing European foreigners to enter his territories, creating his own trade routes. His admiration for Western technologies led Masamune to embark on the first maritime expedition in Japanese history. In this expedition, he visited the Philippines, Mexico, Spain, and Rome. Tadakatsu is known as the warrior who overcame his own death. In the 55 military campaigns he participated in, he was never injured. They say he wasn't even hit once, even though he fought actively on the front lines. He served under the command of the mighty Tokugawa Ieyasu and helped pave the way for the creation of the Tokugawa shogunate. Tadakatsu was a tall samurai and had frightening strength. That made him even more dangerous when he used a spear called Tonbo Giri. He wore a helmet with a big deer antler. His name was known and respected by all daimyos, even among those who belonged to enemy factions. The famous Oda Nobunaga named him samurai among samurais. Sanada Samemon no Suke Yukimura is one of the most famous samurai of the Sengoku Jidai period. Yukimura was known as the Crimson Demon of War and was one of the most skilled warriors in Japan. The Sanada clan served different daimyos during the war, but had a conflict with the powerful Tokugawa clan. During a battle in the region of Nakasendo, Yukimura had only 2,000 men under his command. Nevertheless, they managed to defeat an army of 40,000 soldiers commanded by Tokugawa Hidetada. At a military meeting with members of the Sanada clan and the Tokugawa clan, Yukimura swore he would rip the head off of Tokugawa Ieyasu. During a battle in the siege of Osaka, Yukimura advanced towards the enemy army, accompanied by a small group of samurai on horseback. After fighting at every step, he arrived at the place where Tokugawa Ieyasu was. In an act of bravery, he managed to hurt him. Yukimura, deeply wounded and tired, lost his strength and fell dead. Even Ieyasu himself recognized Yukimura as the greatest warrior in Japan. Tokugawa Ieyasu is believed to have died a few years later from the injury caused by Sanada Yukimura. Born in 1534, Oda Nobunaga is one of the best-known names in Japanese history. During his childhood, Nobunaga was seen as a distracted child and was even called a fool because he played with other children of lower social strata. Nobunaga was an eccentric man. He enjoyed several arts such as painting and a theatrical practice that combined singing, music, and poetry. Nobunaga was a fan of the use of firearms in Japan, buying these weapons from foreign European sellers such as the Portuguese. An exceptional military commander, Nobunaga managed to conquer much of Japanese territory during the Sengoku Jidai, defeating other powerful feudal lords. At the height of his power, Oda Nobunaga was betrayed by Akechi Mitsuhide, one of his main generals. He was surrounded inside the temple at Honnoji in a coup d'etat. With no way out and fearing the dishonor of being captured by his former general, Nobunaga committed seppuku. Before he died, he ordered to burn the temple. His remains were never found. Born in Miyamoto village and named Shinmen Takezo, he was the son of a low-ranking samurai who served the Tokugawa clan. Musashi was a violent child with a strong temperament. He was avoided by many people in the village where he lived. When Musashi was only 13 years old, a samurai named Arima Kihei visited his village looking for an opponent for a duel. Musashi accepted the challenge. With only a wooden stick, he managed to defeat the opponent who wielded a real sword. At the age of 17, Musashi engaged in the famous Battle of Sekigahara, serving Lord Toyotomi Hideyoshi. A few years after the Battle of Sekigahara, Musashi began a journey in Japan. He sought self-improvement in martial arts, challenging kenjutsu schools and even renowned samurai with proven skills. Miyamoto Musashi's name became known throughout Japan. He received numerous invitations to serve many powerful daimyos. Musashi refused most, preferring to dedicate himself to his personal journey. In 1612, he had the famous duel against Sasaki Kojiro on the sands of the island of Ganryujima. Musashi, with only one rowing boat, defeated Kojiro, who used a long sword, striking a violent blow to his head. Musashi was never defeated and won over 50 duels. In the last years of his life, Musashi lived alone in a cave where he dedicated himself to meditation and wrote the well-known book Gori no Sho, the Book of the Five Rings. In this book, Musashi describes his experiences in his duels. He teaches techniques of his Ninten Ichi-ryu style, which involved the use of two swords. Miyamoto Musashi immortalized his name. He is considered the greatest swordsman of all time and a legitimate representative of the samurai spirit. The life of a samurai was full of obligations and codes of conduct. That life would be put at the service of a feudal lord whom the samurai would have to obey and protect at all costs. In turbulent times, the samurai were crucial warriors and made a difference on the battlefields. But wars also came to an end. And after all, what purposes do warriors serve when wars are no longer fought? The low-ranking soldiers returned to their lives in the plantations and other daily jobs. But for the dismissed samurai, there were few alternatives to make a living. Many could not bear the shame of seeing their status diminished. They would rather take their own lives to maintain their dignity. Others adapted to the new times. They found a livelihood through trade or opened academies to teach the art of the sword. But for those who did not know how to engage in any other activity than combat, all that remained was a destiny full of uncertainties. The former samurais wandered around Japan, looking for jobs that needed strength or an intimidating presence. They became known as Ronin, or wavemen, for not staying for long in the same place, dispersing like the sea waves. The Ronin maintained the custom of carrying two swords at the waist, but with less authority compared to the times when they had the title of samurai. In fact, many Ronin were despised in Japanese society. Most ordinary people did not like the samurai and unburdened themselves of their frustrations on those who had lost their nobility titles. For that reason, a Ronin could hardly get an honest job. Many, in order to survive, needed to sell their belongings, including pieces of armor and even one of the swords. Being a Ronin wasn't a lifestyle that one would opt for. In an attempt to regain the title of samurai, many Ronin began to challenge famous swordsmen, hoping to emerge victoriously. In this way, they could be famous, increasing their chances of being hired by some feudal lord. The Ronin agreed to work as paid assassins, mercenaries, and tax collectors. In some cases, they organized themselves into groups to attack government convoys, stealing money and other valuables. That was also a way to take revenge against the feudal lords. The story of the 47 Ronin is one of the most fascinating. In this story, Daimyo Asano was ordained to commit seppuku after having offended and assaulted Lord Kira Yoshinaka during a ceremony at the Shogun Palace. The 47 samurai under Asano's service were forbidden to follow their lord in death, as was customary at the time, and were relieved of their duties, becoming Ronin. Not accepting such an enormous injustice, the 47 Ronin spent 3 years in hiding and created a plan to take revenge on Lord Kira. When they finally launched the attack, the Ronin invaded Lord Kira's mansion. The guards of the mansion had no chance against the group of vengeful Ronin. After killing Lord Kira, the Ronin were able to follow their master, and they all committed seppuku, thus recovering their honor. The story of the 47 Ronin is famous all over Japan. It is seen as an example that honor is above titles and injustices. During the troubled history of feudal Japan, numerous wars were fought that influenced social organization, culture, and many aspects of the life of the ancient Japanese. The warrior class had a special place in Japanese society, with the famous samurai having the most prestigious position, below only the nobility or the imperial family. But the samurai were not the only elite warriors to fight on the battlefields, and even they had equally skilled rivals. The wars caused many misfortunes for the Japanese population. There was a constant increase of criminal groups, who took advantage of the chaos and instability of governments to attack villages and even sacred temples. The need to defend their sanctuaries caused the Buddhist monks to initiate the practice of martial arts. This was possible because some monks had a violent past as thieves, mercenaries, or even ex-samurai, who then decided to seek a life of peace and harmony. Around the 10th century, armed groups of Buddhist monks with the name Sohei, meaning warrior monk, appeared. They quickly became to be recognized and feared for their military expertise. Religious divisions in the Buddhist branches meant that the Sohei did not have a centralized leadership, but they were commanded by regional leaders with their own interests. Some temples began to maintain a regular army of warrior monks. These were the main ones: Te and Ryakuji Temple near Kyoto City, Todaiji Temple in Nara City, and the Midera Temple built near Malhie. Many of these temples were fortified, becoming fortresses to prevent the attack of invaders. There was also another group of monks who caused a supernatural fear in their enemies: Yamabushi, the mountain monks. The Yamabushi were monks who lived like hermits in the mountains that were difficult to reach and full of wildlife. There are many mysteries around the Yamabushi, as their religious practices involved exoteric concepts, including the practice of exorcism, divination, and magic. Warrior monks also became more popular thanks to the support of the lower Japanese classes. Most peasants disliked the samurai and the aristocrats. They thought the monks were a kind of rebel, defying the rules and laws imposed by the rulers. For this reason, some people thought that the Sohei monks were holy men, and others considered them evil enemies. Political rivalries between Buddhist temples became even more evident in the 12th century, when feudal lords daimyo began to seek the support of warrior monks in wars. Daimyo promised financial and political support to the temples, which led many Sohei groups to fight each other on opposite sides during the military conflicts. It would be easy to recognize a Sohei monk on the battlefield. His equipment consisted of wearing traditional samurai armor, but with the addition of a wooden rosary to his neck, and sometimes they combined their traditional garments with a white hood over their heads and faces. The Sohei trained in the use of various weapons, but became known for their lethality with the naginata, a heavy halberd capable of devastating blows. In addition to their martial talent, the Sohei fought supported by their faith, often committing acts of fanaticism and giving up their own lives to achieve their goals. This behavior caused the warrior monks of Japan to be compared in modern times with the medieval knights of the Templar and Teutonic orders. This religious fervor intimidated the enemy troops and increased the admiration of the population, something that was not seen with good eyes by the feudal lords, as they feared the growing influence of Sohei in Japanese society. Many daimyo saw the Sohei as a serious threat against the samurai class and even the feudal system. The famous Oda Nobunaga decided to fight the groups of warrior monks. On September 29, 1571, Oda Nobunaga and his army of 30,000 men besieged the Enryakuji temple and defeated a large number of monks who had gathered to fight Oda. Thousands lost their lives during the fighting, and the temple was completely destroyed. In the following years, the Sohei were persecuted by Oda Nobunaga and his successor Toyotomi Hideyoshi. Their temples were destroyed, and they were forced to flee to the mountains. With Tokugawa Ieyasu's military victory in 1603 and the establishment of a strong and organized central government, the monks were forced to surrender and were banned from using weapons again. The era of Japanese warrior monks came to an end, but their life philosophies, fighting techniques, and unshakable courage were an inspiration to subsequent generations. Honor, courage, benevolence, and loyalty are some of Bushido's main virtues, the code of honor that guided the samurai warriors in their life of servitude and personal improvement. For a long time, the samurai were the dominant warrior class on the battlefields of feudal Japan. This superiority came from privileged training in different styles of martial arts and weapons such as bow and arrow, spears and swords. But the advancement of time is inevitable, and progress eventually gave Japan a new kind of weapon. The age of firearms had started. In 1543, Portuguese merchants took to Japan a weapon known in the West as arquebus. The Japanese were impressed with the destructive power of the weapon, capable of piercing even the thickest armor. The Japanese quickly created their versions of the firearm, the Tanegashima. Tanegashima was used by special units of Ashigaru, light infantry soldiers, who represented a large part of the Japanese feudal armies. A few years after its introduction, this new weapon completely changed the way of war in Japan. Firearms were used mainly during the Sengoku period, when Japan plunged into a terrible civil war, where many feudal lords fought for the country's military supremacy. In 1549, the famous Oda Nobunaga ordered 500 weapons for his army. The effectiveness of the Tanegashima was unquestionable compared to other traditional weapons. The estimate says that a professional archer could shoot 15 arrows, while a soldier armed with a rifle had to load the gun and could fire only once. The round bullets used in rifles constantly changed direction, making accuracy difficult. Also, there was the problem of humidity and rain, as the gunpowder could become unusable. The Japanese quickly created more effective models that were better able to withstand climate adversities. They also developed new firing techniques. The main one was to aim the weapons at a higher angle, thus increasing the range and creating a rain of bullets on the enemy. Even the proud samurai could not deny the effectiveness of firearms, and gradually began to include shooting training in their daily routines. And, contrary to what many think, the samurai did not refuse to use these methods. For them, firearms were another instrument to be mastered and used against the enemies. The greatest honor for a samurai was to defeat as many enemies as possible in a battle and do their duty. For this, he could use a sword or a rifle. The brilliant Japanese craftsman created a powerful variation known as Ozotsu Tanegashima, a heavy hand cannon that required a special posture to be fired. Despite its low accuracy, the cannon could cause great damage, especially if several were fired at the same time. Oda Nobunaga was a great firearms enthusiast, using many at the Battle of Nagashino in 1575, where he faced Takeda Shingen's army. Takeda Shingen's cavalry was the strongest and most feared in all of Japan at the time. Still, it failed to defeat the 3,000 men armed with Tanegashima under Nobunaga's command, definitely marking the defeat of the Takeda clan. The demand for firearms was so great that for a long time, Japan manufactured more firearms than all of Europe. With the end of the wars and the beginning of the Edo period, which established 250 years of peace in Japan, firearms lost importance, becoming restricted to activities such as castle defenses, hunting, and training. During almost the entire Edo period, Japan interrupted trade with foreigners, and the Tanegashima technology stagnated. In 1867, Japan reopened its doors to the outside world during the Meiji era. They realized that their weapons were already very obsolete because there were more advanced models used by Europeans and Americans. The Japanese put an end to the samurai era and embraced a new modern system of military recruitment, importing new weapons into Japan and establishing the Japanese Imperial Army. Today, many works represent the samurai as warriors who only used the sword and despised firearms. But, as history shows, they not only used firearms, but also had a great appreciation for the new technology that would change the world forever. On the battlefields of medieval Japan, the sound of swords could be heard in the distance. Courage or cowardice were always present during the terrible battles. Some samurai performed heroic acts worthy of having their names recorded in history. One of these samurai was Takeda Shingen, who lived during the famous period of Sengoku Jidai, also known as the Warring States era. Shingen was born in Kai Prefecture, a mountainous region west of Tokyo. He was the son of the Takeda clan leader, and, right from childhood, he was trained and educated to be his father's successor. In his youth, he already showed signs that he would be a great military leader. Shingen assumed a role of great importance in the Takeda clan. By the age of 15, he was already helping his father command troops in a battle against a rival clan. But when Shingen came of age, he rebelled against his father. He felt the Takeda clan should strengthen itself and conquer new lands. His father, on the other hand, was content only to protect his borders. And so, at the age of 21, Takeda Shingen became the leader of the powerful Takeda clan, conquering the title of daimyo. Takeda Shingen was a perfect example of a samurai. He was a skillful and fearless warrior, a daring commander, and a refined man who was very fond of music and poetry. He was easily recognized in battle as he wore intimidating armor with red and gold colors and a great white mane. When Takeda Shingen was 49 years old, his clan was one of the few capable of taking on the mighty Oda Nobunaga, who had already begun his campaign to unify Japan. Uesugi Kenshin was a powerful daimyo who also lived during the Sengoku Jidai. He was born in Echigo Prefecture, and his childhood was quite troubled. His father was a famous warlord who was always in conflict with neighboring clans. At the age of 7, his father was killed in battle. Kenshin was sent to be raised in a Buddhist temple where he lived the next 8 years of his life. At 14, Uesugi Kenshin returned to his homeland. He deposed his older brother to take control of his birth clan. In the following years, Kenshin focused his efforts on improving living conditions in Echigo province, establishing new business alliances and new buildings. Uesugi Kenshin was famous for being an honorable and eccentric warrior. He was a fervent Buddhist follower and a follower of Raisavana, the god of war. His qualities as a warrior and military commander made him known as the Dragon of Echigo. The peace lasted a short time in Uesugi's life. Takeda Shingen's ambition to conquer new land took him to areas near the province of Echigo. This is how one of the most famous rivalries of ancient Japan was born, Uesugi Kenshin against Takeda Shingen, or as they became known, the Tiger of Kai against the Dragon of Echigo. Uesugi and Takeda spent many years in arduous battles, but neither side was able to take advantage. But in 1561, Kenshin defeated Takeda's army forces and almost defeated him in battle. During that battle, Uesugi Kenshin identified an opening in the defenses of the opposing army and quickly seized the opportunity. He instigated his horse and passed Takeda's personal guards, putting the two powerful generals face to face in battle. Kenshin struck a few sword blows against Takeda. He managed to defend himself in extremis, using a fan made of wood known as tessen. The duel was broken off when Takeda's personal guards managed to drive Uesugi away, forcing him to retreat to his troops. Uesugi and Takeda are said to have nurtured mutual respect and admiration. After several years of battle, they came to know each other's strengths and weaknesses. That respect became clearer during a particular episode. There was a lack of salt in Kai province, and since salt was highly valued at the time, this was a difficult problem to solve. Upon learning of this, Uesugi sent many sacks of salt to Kai province, although these were his declared enemies. This noble act moved to Takeda Shingen, who, out of respect for his rival, suspended the war for a period of time. This legendary rivalry ended abruptly with Takeda Shingen's death. Takeda Shingen, after defeating a large army combining the forces of the Oda and Tokugawa clans, retreated to his military camp, where he fell victim to a mysterious death. He is believed to have died of pneumonia, but other sources suggest it was a sniper shot. When Uesugi Kenshin learned of Takeda's death, he said, "I lost my great rival. We will never have another hero like that." Now that the Takeda clan was weaker, it seemed like nothing could stop Oda Nobunaga and his great army. Kenshin gathered 30,000 warriors at Matsumoto Castle, where he would confront Oda Nobunaga's 50,000 men army. Even with this difference between the two armies, Uesugi managed to win the battle, forcing the enemy to retreat. Uesugi Kenshin continued to defend his clan until 1578, when he succumbed to a disease. The story of these two great commanders is heroic and tragic. These brave men, who might have been friends in other times, stood on opposite sides in a sad and devastating war. In Japanese folklore, the Gashadokuro is one of the most recognizable yokai. The word Gashadokuro means hungry skeleton in Japanese. The creature was described as having an insatiable hunger for human flesh. This abomination was a giant skeleton, about 15 times the size of a man, roaming the fields in the darkest hours of the night with rattling teeth and bones. Upon entering a human, he would approach as quietly as possible, despite the creaking of bones. Then, he would take his victim by surprise, crushing him in the hands and devouring his head. Supposedly, the only protection against the Gashadokuro was to listen from a distance to the sound of the bones clinking, fleeing quickly before the creature arrived. Otherwise, the victim's fate would be sealed. The Gashadokuro materialized in the hundreds of bones from the rotting bodies of soldiers on the battlefields, especially the bones and spirits of starvation victims. For this reason, the creature is often associated with famine and death. According to one version of this legend, the origin of the creature happened more than 1,000 years ago in a rebellion against the government led by the samurai Masako. When he was killed in battle, his daughter, Takeyasha Hime, a great sorceress, continued her father's cause. With black magic, he summoned the huge skeleton, Gashadokuro, from the bodies of the dead soldiers to attack the city of Kyoto. Gashadokuro is often associated with the Japanese festival of Oban, in honor of deceased ancestors. During the event, people light lanterns and make offerings to protect their homes from evil spirits, including the Gashadokuro. Ushioni, the bovine demon, is a mythical creature of Japanese folklore found in several locations across the country's west. He had a monstrous demon spider-like body, as well as the hide and head of an ox or cow. His fangs were sharp, with long claws, as well as glowing red eyes that struck fear into the hearts of those who saw them. The Ushioni inhabited regions near water sources. They had a cruel and evil temper. Their powerful roar could be heard from miles away. The Ushioni exuded a toxic poison and devoured human beings. They were extremely aggressive and territorial, attacking anyone who came close to their domain. The Ushioni are an iconic figure in Japanese folklore, representing the dark and terrifying side of supernatural beings. Their appearance and aggressive behavior made them a feared and respected creature. A supernatural creature in Japanese folklore, the Rokurokubi is a kind of yokai. The name means long-necked woman. And yes, Rokurokubis were known to have extremely long necks, being able to stretch them with remarkable lengths. Typically depicted as women, with pale skin and long flowing hair, Rokurokubis looked normal. But at night, their necks reached incredible lengths, allowing them to hunt humans and drink their blood. According to legend, Rokurokubis emerged when a woman told a lie. As a result, the neck started to lengthen uncontrollably. This transformation was considered irreversible
and the Rokurokubi were doomed to live the rest of their lives with abnormally long necks. In Japanese folklore, the legend of the Rokurokubi was often seen as a cautionary tale about the dangers of lying and deception. The Nue is a creature from Japanese folklore possessing a raccoon's body, a monkey's head, a snake's tail, and tiger's limbs. This unique blend of different animals represents the merging of different forces of nature, turning it into a mysterious and fearsome being. This symbolism is firmly rooted in Japanese mythological beliefs and traditions. Legends say that the Nue is a harbinger of misfortune and disaster, spreading disease and sudden death wherever it appears. Its mysterious cries are already a harbinger of disaster. The Nue is associated with storms and is considered a lightning yokai, with a symbolic role like that of the Chimera in Greek mythology. The story around the Nue and Emperor Konoe is among the most popular legends related to this mysterious entity in Japanese folklore. The tale is based on the emperor's unsettling dreams and the brave intervention of a samurai warrior. Emperor Konoe started experiencing a mysterious illness towards the end of the 12th century. On top of his physical ailments, he was constantly plagued by nightmares. During the night, a black cloud hovered over the Imperial palace, with its strange sounds and ominous feeling. Many people believed that this cloud was a manifestation of the Nue, which had the ability to bring disease and catastrophe. So serious was Nue's threat that something needed to be done to protect the emperor and the kingdom. Minamoto no Yorimasa, a well-known samurai warrior, took it upon himself to step forward at this critical time. He took up his bow and arrow. When the Nue appeared that night, Yorimasa, applying his skill and accuracy, fired a well-aimed arrow at the creature, mortally wounding it. To prevent the Nue from returning to inflict more damage, the creature's body was thrown into a boat and carried out to sea. The spot where the Nue was defeated is today known as Nuezaka, a small hill in Kyoto, named in remembrance of the event. To reward his bravery and skill, Minamoto no Yorimasa was given a famous sword called Shishio, meaning sword of the lion. This legend bears witness to the fearlessness and duty of samurai warriors. The Nue may be seen as a manifestation of human anxiety and fear. It embodies the unknown, that which lies in the shadows and brings misfortune. Nevertheless, like many yokai, the Nue also stands as a reminder of the natural world's complexity and the way in which all things are connected. In these days, the Nue thrives in Japanese popular culture as a representation of ancient folklore. It is frequently depicted in films, anime, and literature, acting both as a creature to be feared and as a symbol of the complex web of stories and traditions that shape Japan's cultural landscape. Hone-onna was a vengeful spirit in Japanese folklore, seeking revenge on men who harmed her in her life. Her name meant Bone Woman. According to legend, Hone-onna was a beautiful woman abandoned or betrayed by her husband or lover. Feelings of anger and resentment at her death transformed the spirit into a malevolent force. As a skeletal figure or woman with a putrefying flesh, wearing a white kimono, the Hone-onna would appear at night, near rivers or dark alleys, attacking innocent men. She would use her charm to fatally lure men, or she would transform herself into a terrifying creature to terrify them. The Hone-onna had the power to drain the life force from her victims, leaving them weakened or dead. The creature symbolizes the power of female revenge and the dangers of betraying or mistreating women. Originating in the Edo period, Juboko is a mythical tree in Japanese folklore that grew in areas where many people had died, such as battlefields or cemeteries. The tree would have a pale white bark filled with sharp thorns. It fed on the blood of those who had died violent or unjust deaths. According to legend, if someone passed by a Jukobo tree at night and heard blood dripping, they would have to flee as quickly as possible. It was a sign that the tree had recently fed on human blood. In some versions, the Jukobo tree could also take the form of a beautiful woman to lure innocent victims. In other tales, Jukobo could resurrect the dead by feeding them blood. This would be a way for the spirits of the dead to take revenge on the living. The Nure-onna is a beautiful woman who attracts her victims with her charm and fake distress, but her true form is revealed when she displays her lower body, which is that of a giant serpent. Her upper body is human, with long flowing hair and pale skin, adding to her charm. Seen around bodies of water such as rivers or seas, Nure-onna draws fishermen or unsuspecting travelers to their deaths by pretending to be in danger or in need of help. As she gets closer, she attacks her victims, pulling them into the water with her snake-like tail and drowning them. The name Nure-onna can be translated as wet woman, suggesting her close connection with water. Renowned for her crafty tactics to lure victims, Nure-onna has a range of supernatural powers. Some tales assert that she can paralyze her victims with her gaze, or by breathing in a deadly poison she releases. Some variations of the myth include Nure-onna with a child whom she uses as bait to lure her victims. When kind-hearted people reach out to help her, she unveils her hideous shape and attacks them without mercy. Gangoji was reportedly a ghost of an Oni demon who haunted the Gangoji temple. Dressed in monk's clothing, he would crawl out to attack children in the temple. According to legend, strange deaths began to occur at Gangoji Temple, and everyone suspected that there was a yokai there. A new temple apprentice wanted to solve the mystery. He waited all night until the monster appeared. Grabbing it by the hair, the apprentice ripped off Gangoji's entire scalp, who still managed to escape. Following the trail of blood left by the yokai, he found the tomb of a rather slothful and evil former temple servant. The servant's ghost had turned into this terrible demon, defeated by the apprentice. Owing to his achievement, he became a priest in the temple, and Gangoji's scalp turned into one of Gangoji's sacred treasures. The ubume is a ghost-like entity in Japanese folklore, representing a woman who died during or shortly after childbirth. Depicted as a tragic figure, stricken with grief at having left her child behind in the mortal world, the ubume appears to its living or traveling family members. It usually seeks to help look after its baby. The ubume are often escorted by a flock of crows and seagulls. They have long, disheveled hair and are dressed in white, Japan's traditional mourning color. Their eyes are sunken and their skin is pale, besides having a cloyingly sweet smell. People will perceive her as a normal-looking woman holding a baby who tries to hand him to someone and then disappears. Once they have the child in their arms, people realize that it is nothing more than a pile of leaves or a large stone. The myth says that the ubume are followed by a loud wailing sound, said to be the cry of their unborn child. If a person adopts the child of an ubume, they are cursed with bad luck. This manifests itself in the form of illness, poverty, or even death. Some ways of avoiding being cursed by an ubume do exist. First, the best thing to do is to steer clear of it and do not accept its child. Another way is to say a prayer or perform a special incantation. Lastly, some believe that one can also appease the ubume by offering it a gift, such as clothes or food. Stories surrounding the ubume often elicit a sense of sadness and empathy, as they depict the struggles and pain women went through during childbirth in ancient times, when medical care was scarce and mortality rates for both the child and the mother were extremely high during the labor. The ubume acts as a reminder of human life's tragedies and mysteries, as well as the complexities and challenges faced by women, particularly in Japan's historical context. Gaki are a group of supernatural beings in Japanese Buddhism known as hungry ghosts. They are haunted spirits of deceased individuals who were corrupted by intense greed, selfishness, and desire during their lives. These spirits are reborn in a realm of suffering and unquenchable hunger. The Gaki have skinny limbs, pouchy bellies, and thin necks, all of which epitomize their eternal hunger and unfulfillment. Their mouths are curiously tiny, preventing them from eating the food they desperately want, adding to their misery. The samsara cycle in Buddhism entails the continuous birth, death, and rebirth process. The 6 realms of rebirth represent distinct states of existence in which beings can be reborn based on their karma and deeds in previous lives. These beings belong to the 6 realms of rebirth in Buddhist cosmology, representing the realm of suffering caused by attachment and desire, the result of negative karma from actions driven by excessive greed, jealousy, and selfishness. The Gaki suffer from endless hunger and thirst, but their desires can never be fulfilled due to their small and inadequate mouths. Buddhist teachings suggest that Gaki can free themselves from this state through compassion, generosity, and positive karma. The Gaki serve as a cautionary reminder in Buddhist philosophy, pointing out the destructive nature of excessive desire and the importance of nurturing spiritual virtues in one's life. Anenras are demons or divine deities of darkness and smoke in Japanese mythology. They lurk in fires, and when they emerge, they appear as a billowing blob of smoke or mist resembling a human. Anera is smoke personified. A peaceful and inoffensive yokai, the Anera was seen as a symbol of purity and enlightenment. It could, however, be mischievous or malevolent. It could cause disease or possess the bodies of humans who breathe in its smoke. Modern yokai scholars have suggested that its name sounds like Enma, the Lord of Hell, and Arbiter of the Dead. As hell is a fire and smoke environment, Anenra could be the spirits of the dead rising along the fumes. This is why the Anenra would only ever be visible to someone with a calm and pure heart and mind. Dorotabo is a vindictive yokai ghost. He emerged from the hapless spirit of a former rice field owner, who came back to seek revenge on those who left his rice field in ruins due to neglect and ignorance. The myth goes that Dorotabo would arise from his grave every night as a mud-covered rotting corpse with only 1 eye and 3 fingers, standing for the 3 chief vices: anger, greed, and ignorance. The ghost then wanders through the bushy fields, bellowing in a mournful voice, "Give me back my rice field." This is a warning for those who neglect their rice fields, telling them that they should be punished if they do not look after them. It would continuously mourn and haunt the rice field, disturbing people until its offender either repented or sold the land to someone who could take proper care of their rice field. Rice is a staple food in Japan, and the Dorotabo is rumored to be a display of anger from those who have worked hard to grow it. A Dorotabo apparition is a warning to those who neglect their rice fields, which have been their life's endeavor. Kasha, the legendary yokai from Japanese folklore, is a cat-like demonic creature with burning red eyes. Its body is covered in flames and dark fur. The Kasha has immense strength and agility. The Kasha is notorious for its unsettling habit of stealing corpses. It prowls at night, peering into funeral processions and cemeteries to snatch the bodies of wicked wrongdoers or those who have committed severe crimes during their lives. It grabs the corpse and hauls it away, soaring through the night with its fiery, spectral aura. The Kasha brings the stolen bodies to the realm of the dead, or straight to hell, where the evildoers face their eternal punishment. Notwithstanding its sinister reputation, the Kasha is regarded as a creature of justice in Japanese folklore. Its deeds are seen as a means of punishing wrongdoers and making sure that they face the consequences of their actions, even in death. Kasha's origins date back to ancient Japan, where the yokai would serve as a warning, stressing the importance of leading a virtuous life. Its mysterious nature and association with death made the Kasha a popular topic. Mikoshi Nyudo is a kind of yokai that appears at night to lonely travelers. It looks like a monk with an unusually long neck that grows taller the more the victim looks at it. If the victim stares at Mikoshi Nyudo's head, its neck grows to the point where it becomes ready to strike. Among the best-known stories about the Mikoshi Nyudo is one that came from the Odo district in Okayama Prefecture. Upon encountering a Mikoshi Nyudo, the person can avoid its attack by focusing their eyes on the creature's feet and avoiding facing it, preventing it from growing. Many ways to avoid being killed by Mikoshi Nyudo exist. Some say that we can sing specific words to make the Mikoshi Nyudo vanish. Others claim that we can smoke tobacco or estimate the height of the Mikoshi Nyudo to break its spell. The Mikoshi Nyudo is a popular figure in Japanese folklore and reminds us of how dangerous curiosity can be and how important caution is when traveling at night. The Tenome is a yokai from Japanese folklore, known for his eerie and disturbing figure. It is a humanoid creature with large eyes in the center of its hands. The legend goes that this is the ghost of a blind man who was robbed and murdered, and, prior to his death, sought to punish his assailant. The creature now wanders in search of revenge, searching for the evildoer with his eyes in his hands. This yokai is known for being tricky and menacing. It roams the streets and remote areas, creeping around in the shadows and frightening unsuspecting passers-by. The Tenome enjoys inflicting fear and panic on the people it finds. This yokai can spring suddenly from its hiding spot, flashing its giant eye in the palm of its hand to terrify those around. It wanders at night, led by the eyes in its hands, and it is rumored that it can smell living human beings. Should it capture a person, it can sap their life energy or even gobble them up. Stories of close encounters with this mysterious one-eyed yokai have been passed down for generations, boosting its reputation as a classic entity in Japanese folklore. Tenome's presence calls the notion that intense, unfulfilled desires can have after-death consequences.
The history of ancient Japan is dotted with remarkable episodes that have influenced Japanese culture for many centuries. The Mongol invasion of Japan was one of the most important in the country, immortalized by the epic battles and bravery of the samurai warriors against a much larger and better equipped enemy army. The Mongol invasion of Japan was a military campaign led by the Mongol Empire in the late 13th century. The Mongol forces led by the famous military leader Kublai Khan had expansionist ambitions in Asia, and Japan was a strategic target. The invasion had two attempted landings by Mongol forces on the Japanese coast in 1274 and 1281. At the time, the Mongols had already conquered half of China and Korea, annexing these territories to the massive empire. The Mongol Emperor Kublai Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan and founder of China's Yuan dynasty, wanted to include Japan in his empire. He may have wanted to conquer Japan because of his territorial resources, as the country had a reputation for being rich in gold. Another theory indicates that Kublai wanted to suppress trade between Japan and the great enemy in southern China, the Southern Song dynasty. Initially, Kublai tried a diplomatic approach, sending a letter to Japan in 1268, expressing a desire to promote friendly relations with the Kamakura shogunate, but demanding that a tribute be paid to the Mongol court, threatening a military invasion if the terms were refused. Other letters and Chinese ambassadors were sent by 1274, but all were blatantly ignored by the Japanese. This angered Kublai, who decided to carry out his threats. On November 19, 1274, the Mongol fleet sailed through the East China Sea and reached the Japanese coast. The first invasion occurred that year, when a naval force of about 900 ships and 33,000 men was sent by the Mongol Empire to land on the island of Kyushu, southern Japan. The Mongol force was led by Argun, an experienced general who hoped to conquer Japan quickly. The Japanese, who had never faced such a large and organized foreign army, were ill-prepared for the invasion, but they managed to mobilize a defense force that included samurai and common soldiers, led by the samurai Takezaki Suenaga. The defenders positioned themselves on the beach of Hakata Bay and waited for the Mongol troops to arrive. The Battle of Bunei, also known as the First Battle of Hakata Bay, was the first confrontation of the Mongol invasion of Japan. Initially, the Japanese met the invaders with a barrage of arrows, but Mongol war tactics and their numerical superiority quickly took effect. The Mongol used effective cavalry and mounted archery tactics against the Japanese infantry. The samurai were well-trained warriors, but lacked the experience to take on the Mongols in battle. The Japanese were also at a disadvantage when it came to weapons and equipment. The Japanese swords and armor of that time were inadequate to face the long-range weapons of the Mongols. The short bows of the Mongol soldiers had greater reach, and the arrows were poisoned, making even glancing blows fatal to the Japanese. The Mongols also had explosive projectiles that they learned to make from the Chinese. Gunpowder was unknown in Japan, and the projectiles exploded in the air, causing fire and smoke. This sight will have surely haunted the Japanese warriors, terrifying the horses that went berserk on the battlefield. After a few hours of fighting, the Mongols began to advance towards the city of Dazaifu, capital of Chikuzen province, defended by a Japanese force led by the samurai Kikuchi Taketoki. The city was an important political and economic center. Capturing it would guarantee a strategic advantage for the invaders. The fight for the city lasted 3 days. The Japanese fiercely resisted the Mongol attacks, but the lack of adequate supplies and equipment, as well as the numerical disadvantage, forced the Japanese defenders to retreat. The city was taken by the Mongols on June 25, 1274. The Battle of Bune was a decisive defeat for the Japanese. About 6,000 Japanese soldiers were killed, and another 3,000 captured. The Mongols suffered less than 100 casualties and managed to establish a military base in Kyushu, beginning the Mongol occupation of Japan. Despite the victory, the Mongols failed to consolidate their foothold in Japan. A violent storm destroyed much of the fleet as they attempted to return to China, losing many soldiers and ships. The remaining Mongol fleet withdrew, leaving the Japanese victorious. Although the Battle of Bune was a defeat for the Japanese, it showed Kublai Khan that the samurai resistance was strong. A full invasion of the country would be difficult and dangerous, but the Mongols were determined to conquer Japan and planned a second invasion in 1281. The 1281 invasion was much larger than the first. The Mongol forces had assembled a fleet of about 4,400 ships and more than 140,000 men, including Chinese and Koreans. Kublai Khan had learned from the first invasion, and this time, the Mongols were better prepared, with improved equipment and a better planned strategy. The Japanese side had also learned from the previous experience. The coastal fortifications were about 20 kilometers long, including stone walls and watchtowers that helped the shogunate army to stop part of the Mongol landing. The Mongols landed on the island of Kyushu in 2 places. The first part of the invasion was on June 30th, 1281, and the second on August 2nd of that year. The Japanese forces, led by the shogun Hojo Tokimune, were ready to face the invaders with a force consisting of samurai, ashigaru soldiers, and warrior monks. The Mongol fleet faced strong resistance from the Japanese. The Battle of Koan, also known as the Second Battle of Hakata Bay, was the main confrontation of the 1281 invasion. The Mongol forces were properly deployed on the beach, while the Japanese forces occupied a higher position, allowing the archers to have the upper hand. But the numerical superiority and warfare tactics of cavalry and mounted archery of the Mongols were still a significant threat. The battle lasted about 2 months and was one of the largest naval confrontations in history. The Mongols advanced deep into Japanese territory, capturing towns and villages, but they were unable to seize the main Japanese fortifications, which were defended by the brave samurai. Still, the Mongol forces remained ruthless, living up to the terrible reputation of the warrior people of the steppes. Using cavalry tactics, the Mongols surrounded and attacked the Japanese defenders from all sides. When all seemed lost for the Japanese, an unexpected turn of events took place. The Mongols were defeated in an event known as the Kamikaze, or Divine Wind. On August 15, 1281, a violent and unpredictable storm hit the Japanese coast, destroying much of the Mongol fleet and killing many soldiers. The remaining fleet was forced to retreat, again allowing the Japanese to win. Many Japanese of that time looked upon this storm as a supernatural episode, a blessing from the kami, the gods of Japan, in aid of their people. The Japanese resistance and the destructive typhoon fractured the Mongol invasion. The Mongol forces retreated with heavy casualties, and many soldiers made prisoners. The botched invasion was a turning point for Japan, which was able to resist a second foreign incursion and protect its independence. Even the strong Mongol Empire was destabilized by the impact of the defeat caused by the inhabitants of an isolated island. Kublai Khan hoped that the conquest of Japan would strengthen its position as leader of Asia and give him access to important resources and trade. But the fruitless invasion and the destruction of much of the fleet led to a decline in Mongol influence in East Asia. Although the Mongols failed to conquer Japan, the invasion had a significant impact on Japan-China relations for many centuries to come. It also showed the Japanese that their country was not impervious, leading them to strengthen defenses and build fortifications. Kublai Khan continued to send emissaries to convince Japan to join the Yuan dynasty's tax system, but to no avail. Over time, the Japanese resistance against the Mongols assumed legendary proportions. Today, it is the inspiration for stories and adaptations in a variety of formats, such as books, movies, and games. Above all, it has immortalized the bravery of the Japanese people and the samurai warriors as loyal defenders of the homeland.
Tokugawa Ieyasu founded and was the first ruler of the Tokugawa shogunate, ruling Japan from 1603 to 1868. Born during the stormy era of the warring states of Japan, Ieyasu established himself as a pivotal figure on the political scene, following strategic alliances and military victories. His shogunate set up a 250-year spell of relative peace and stability in Japan, known as the Edo period. Ieyasu was born in 1543, when Japan was fragmented into several warring states, each under the control of a feudal lord known as a daimyo. Initially called Matsudaira Takechiyo, Ieyasu was the heir to the Matsudaira, a minor clan that ruled the Mikawa region. He came from a warrior lineage, but his clan was besieged by much more powerful forces. It was common in those days to have members of noble families as political hostages to secure alliances or cease hostilities between rival clans. Ieyasu was repeatedly taken hostage during his childhood. Aged just 6, he was sent as a hostage to the Imagawa clan, one of the region's ruling families, to ensure the loyalty of the Matsudaira clan. During his stint as a hostage, Ieyasu was given an education and military training, which was key to his development as a leader. His experiences as a hostage, together with the political instability of the time, gave him a profound understanding of the complex networks of alliances and diplomacy required to survive Japan's complex political landscape. Throughout his life, Ieyasu would change his name several times, a common practice among the samurai elite of the time. After Matsudaira Takechiyo, he became known as Matsudaira Motoyasu, and finally adopted the name Tokugawa Ieyasu after forming an alliance with Oda Nobunaga. The relationship between Ieyasu and Nobunaga started to develop after the Battle of Okehazama in 1560. During this engagement, Oda Nobunaga, although outnumbered, managed to defeat and kill Imagawa Yoshimoto, one of the main leaders of the Imagawa clan. This event provided Ieyasu with the opportunity to split with the Imagawa clan and seek a more independent position serving Oda Nobunaga. This was a crucial alliance, as Nobunaga was well on the way to unifying Japan under his rule. With Nobunaga's support, Ieyasu consolidated his control over the Mikawa region and expanded his territory. During their alliance, Ieyasu and Nobunaga helped each other in multiple campaigns. Nonetheless, they kept a balanced relationship, with Ieyasu retaining some autonomy. Oda Nobunaga's death in 1582 was a crucial turning point. He was double-crossed by Akechi Mitsuhide, one of his own generals. Following Nobunaga's death, Ieyasu took an important role in supporting Toyotomi Hideyoshi, another prominent Nobunaga supporter, in his revenge against Akechi. Hideyoshi was able to find Mitsuhide first and faced him in battle. Akechi Mitsuhide survived for 13 days until he was finally beaten and killed by Hideyoshi at the Battle of Yamazaki. Tokugawa Ieyasu and Toyotomi Hideyoshi's relationship is one of the most intriguing and critical to the unification of Japan during the Warring States era. The two daimyos quickly found themselves on opposing sides in the dispute over the control of Nobunaga's former territories. In spite of the initial tensions, Hideyoshi, acknowledging Ieyasu's strength and influence, pursued an alliance. Rather than an open conflict, they decided on a strategic alliance, and, overall, the two cemented a fragile peace. The fortitude of this alliance between Ieyasu and Hideyoshi was repeatedly tested, most notably during the 1590 siege of Odawara, when Hideyoshi deployed an immense army to subdue the Hojo clan in Odawara. Although Ieyasu was not directly implicated in the conflict, he was urged by Hideyoshi to move his troops to help, relocating from his hometown of Mikawa to the strategically vital region of Edo, where today's Tokyo is located. Rather than a direct attack against the well-fortified Odawara castle, Hideyoshi chose a siege strategy. He built fortifications around the castle, effectively isolating it. After nearly 3 months of siege, and without a major direct confrontation, the leaders of the Hojo clan perceived the futility of their resistance and chose to surrender. Following the collapse of the Hojo clan, Hideyoshi relocated Tokugawa Ieyasu to the Kanto region. Ieyasu was granted control over the lands previously held by the Hojo, including the entire Edo region. This would form the foundation for the future Tokugawa shogunate following Hideyoshi's death. Once Hideyoshi understood that he was dying and had no adult heir, just a very young son named Toyotomi Hideyori, he set up a 5-man council of regents to help guide the boy to adulthood. Ieyasu was added to this council, and, as its most powerful and influential member, quickly became the dominant figure. By the time Hideyoshi died in 1598, Japan was on the verge of chaos once again. A rift arose between the 5 regents and other daimyos as to who was to lead the nation. Some supporters of Hideyoshi thought that his son should take over the post, while others supported the idea that Tokugawa Ieyasu, due to his experience and loyalty, would become the shogun, as the supreme leader of Japan's army was known at the time. Simmering tensions between Ieyasu's supporters and those loyal to Hideyoshi led to the famous Battle of Sekigahara, held on October 21, 1600. Forces fighting this battle were divided between the Eastern Army, led by Tokugawa Ieyasu, who sought to take total control of Japan, and the Western Army, formed by a coalition of daimyos who wished to preserve Hideyoshi's legacy and ensure that his young son Hideyori could succeed him. The battle started in the wee hours of the morning under thick fog, which made it initially difficult for the two sides to engage completely. A key point in the battle was Kobayakawa Hideyaki's indecision, who led a significant force on the Western Army side in favor of Hideyori. Tokugawa Ieyasu, knowing of Hideyaki's possible wavering, had set up cannons aimed at Hideyaki's position as an incentive for him to pick a side. After some initial hesitation, Kobayakawa Hideaki and his forces eventually betrayed the Western Army, striking it by surprise. Hideyaki's treachery broke the Western Army's front line, causing its defenses to crumble rapidly. As the afternoon unfolded, it became clear that Ieyasu's Eastern Army would be victorious, and the remaining forces of the Western Army began to retreat in disarray. Towards the end of the battle, Tokugawa Ieyasu's Eastern Army had clearly emerged victorious. This triumph was crucial in solidifying Ieyasu's position as Japan's most powerful daimyo. By 1603, Ieyasu was formally appointed shogun by the emperor, signaling the beginning of the Tokugawa shogunate and a dynasty that would rule Japan for over 250 years until the 1868 Meiji Restoration. Once he had cemented his legacy, Ieyasu officially stepped down in 1605, handing over the title of shogun to his son Hidetada, who would become the second Tokugawa shogun. Ieyasu nevertheless continued to wield great influence until his death in 1616. The legacy of Tokugawa Ieyasu is in many ways the turning of Japan from a country fragmented by internal conflicts into a centralized and unified nation, which, notwithstanding its isolationism, laid the foundations for its ultimate rise as a world power.
A samurai's promise is an unbreakable vow. When he says something will be done, it is as if it had already happened. Few things in life are more valuable to a samurai than his pledged word. So when a samurai breaks his promise, terrible things might happen. Today, we'll learn about the frightening legend about a samurai who, even with the best of intentions, broke his promises and the terrible consequences of such an act. This video is sponsored by Tokyo Treat and Sakurako. If you are an enthusiast of Japanese history and culture like me, how about joining the eagerness to learn and the desire for a treat, signing in for a subscription of the Tokyo Treat and Sakurako snack boxes? Tokyo Treat brings you up to 20 unique Japanese snacks that could only be found in Japan. Every month you will get a box with different and very exclusive seasonal flavored Japanese snacks for your enjoyment. August's box was Sugoi summer themed, and I love to taste the Chupa Chups strawberry cream soda paired with watermelon seed ramune candy. If you'd like to try some exclusive snacks made by local Japanese producers, then you should try Sakurako. They offer the most authentic flavors, including snacks and teas. And with this box, you'll get a special Japanese tableware sent to you every month. This month's theme was Okinawa Retreat, with delicious treats from this southern island region like the Okinawa Cinnamon Cookie. Don't worry about having to Google the products, since each box comes with a cultural guide booklet, so you'll know about the food and the Japanese culture involved. Enjoy Tokyo Treat and Sakurako Snack Box along your day and when you need to relax and have a bite. Live all the Japanese experience in a box. Sign up now for this exclusive Japanese snack box with a code for $5 off with your first order. Link in the description. A samurai followed the last moments of his dying wife. The doctors had already told him that she would not see another day. The girl was still young, but she did not fear the end. Her biggest concern was that her husband would marry another woman after her death. "My dear wife, I would like to know what ails you, so that I can ease your suffering. I am afraid that you will find another woman who will win your heart and erase the memories of our love. I swear that no one will replace you in my heart." Samurai oath is something profoundly serious and should not be taken lightly. I know that you will get married as soon as I leave this world. You have my word of honor. I will never marry another woman. The young woman was pleased, because her husband was an honorable man and had never broken a promise. "I would like you to bury me in the garden below my favorite plum tree. That way I will always be close to you." As predicted, the young woman did not resist until the birth of a new day. During his wife's wake, the samurai placed next to her body the bell she used in her Buddhist rituals. He believed that she would certainly like it. The samurai's wife was buried according to her wishes, in the shadow of the garden's plum tree. A great sadness devastated the samurai's heart. For a long time he mourned the death of his beloved. For more than a year, the samurai maintained his mourning, and did not notice that he was coveted by several suitors. But he kept his promise, and did not think about finding another wife. The samurai was called to his master's palace, who had received complaints that he had ignored marriage proposals from other families of honorable samurai. "You are the only son of a line of warriors who served this clan for many centuries. Therefore it is your obligation to give continuity to your family and preserve the history of your ancestors. I have a perfect bride for you. She is beautiful, sweet, and from an honorable family. With her you will have heirs who will honor your family name." The samurai could not disrespect the duties towards his master and his family, so he agreed to get married again. Despite fulfilling his duty, the samurai broke the promise made to his former wife. It was already night when the new wife woke up with the ringing of a bell in the garden. Her husband was sound asleep after a tiring day, so she decided to examine the origin of the sound. She went to the balcony looking for the sound, but when she reached the garden, the tinkle stopped. The next day, the samurai told his wife that he would spend the night away because he was in charge of leading the night watchman of his lord's castle. When she saw her husband leaving, the young woman was slightly anxious to have to spend the night alone in that house. She took a while, but finally fell asleep. It was already past midnight when she woke up again, with the noise of the bell. The young woman heard the bell sound getting closer. The bedroom door opened, and the figure of a woman with her hair on her face appeared. The young woman tried to scream and run, but she was utterly paralyzed. The visitor approached her. "This house belongs to me. This is the last warning. Leave this house or you will die." The next day, the samurai found his wife crying, begging him to return her to her family because the ghost of his former wife was threatening her. "There's no need to be afraid. It must have been a nightmare." "It was not a nightmare. I saw her with my own eyes." "Tonight I'll leave 2 of my men with you and you'll be safe." With the arrival of the night, the samurai said goodbye to his wife, leaving her in the company of 2 security guards. At night, the young woman went to her room while the 2 guards played a game of Go to pass the time. It was already late when the bells started ringing. The guards saw the undead crossing the room, but, as if by magic, they were completely frozen. The old wife entered her rival's room, and the guards heard only cries of terror. I said it was the last warning. When the samurai returned home, the guards were asleep, and a terrible trail of blood proved that something awful had happened. The husband was horrified to find his headless wife's body, which seemed to have been forcibly torn off. The samurai's screaming woke the guards up, and they fell to the ground. The men told the samurai the terrible scenes they witnessed, and also talked about the supernatural creature responsible for that crime. Suddenly, the noise of the bell echoed, coming from the garden. The samurai opened the door to the garden and found a figure below the plum tree. He approached and saw that she was his former wife. In her hand, she had the head of his unfortunate new wife. You promised me that you would never let another woman take my place. She was innocent. She did not deserve such an end. When a samurai breaks a promise, he must be prepared to face a terrible consequence. You're an abominable creature. The samurai was plagued by guilt. If he had kept his word, none of that would have happened, and the innocent girl would still be alive. Extremely ashamed, the samurai chose the only path he considered worthy. In ancient Japan, there was a man who had always been lucky in life. He had been born into a good family, and so inherited the title of samurai. Feeling tired, he tied his horse to a rock and slept lying on it. But the samurai awoke, startled by the neighing of his horse. The animal had shrunk and was being carried by an ant towards a small hole in a rock. The samurai tried to grab the horse by the tail, but ended up falling for the spell that made him shrink just like his animal. The samurai and the horse took a mythical journey to another spiritual plane. They came to an obscure place and had no idea where they were. They found large rice fields where several workers were working under the aegis of demons. That place could only be the land of the Oni, the terrifying Japanese demons. A huge red demon walked up to the samurai, probably the demon lord. The man thought quickly and had an idea. He took a bow before the creature and offered his noble horse to the demon. Oni was pleased, since it was unusual for him to receive gifts willingly. He usually grabbed everything he wanted. As a sign of his goodwill, he allowed the man to return to mortal land, rewarding him for his horse. The demon handed the man a sack full of gold, as he knew that greedy men worshipped that worthless metal in the land of demons. He said the man could return to the earthly dimension, but he could never talk about the secret passage in that mysterious rock. And the samurai returned to his world. Upon his return, the samurai opened the heavy bag that had been handed to him and was impressed by the fortune. He was indeed a lucky man. As a newly rich man, he decided to abandon his daimyo and buy a beautiful estate to enjoy life. He lived his days spending his money on women and drink. His attitude quickly caused him to lose his assets. he became a penniless alcoholic. And that's when his luck deserted him. He was now a ruined Ronin, who tried to drink in the taverns. However, the owners refused to serve him, because they knew he had no money. So the Ronin began to boast, saying that he was a friend of an Oni, and that everyone would regret what they were doing. The customers and the tavern keeper laughed at him, saying that if he was able to prove his claim, he could drink for free for the rest of his life. Sasaya Hirokazuemon led everyone to the mysterious rock. He was looking for the entrance hole but couldn't find it. Meanwhile, everyone was laughing at the man, who seemed to have gone crazy from drinking so much. Suddenly, the man began to be swallowed by the hole that opened in the rock. All those present were frightened and ran away. The man fell at the feet of the Demon King, who scolded him for being so stupid. The demon took him to his sharp teeth and said he wanted to devour the Promise Breaker. But death would almost be a blessing for the former samurai's crime. He was condemned to work forever in the rice fields under the lashes of the Onis. He was very lucky in life and never used it to do good. All the fruits of his good fortune were wasted.
The samurai warrior class has been the iconic badge of feudal Japan for a long time. As early as 1180, the samurai ethos rested on the virtues of loyalty and courage. Japan cut itself off from the outside world in 1635, ending the era of samurai mercenaries going abroad, who went on to fortify themselves internally and grow into a strong political class during the shogunate period. This was until Japan underwent a political overhaul with the Meiji era during the 19th century, and the samurai increasingly lost power. But the end of the samurai did not come peacefully, but by means of a large-scale uprising, the Satsuma Rebellion. Saigo Takamori is widely credited as the last samurai. Born in 1827, he was deeply driven to fulfill the samurai warrior ideals of loyalty, honor, and duty. In his youth, he was influenced by the myth learning, burning emphasis on the emperor's divinity, and hatred of westernization. This influence faded as he grew older, but Takamori continued to be passionately loyal to his nation and the samurai way of life until his death. As military affairs leader of the Satsuma daimyo, he played a significant role in toppling the Tokugawa shogunate and bringing about the 1868 Meiji Restoration. His involvement in this conflict, together with the way in which he extolled the samurai warrior's virtues, brought him a position in the new government and a lasting reputation among the Japanese people. The Meiji Restoration, ironically orchestrated almost entirely by samurai, ended the privileges of this warrior class by completely restructuring Japan's feudal class system. In the early 1870s, a set of new laws cut samurai wages and banned them from using katanas or wearing their traditional top-knot hairstyle. The samurai became increasingly angry about social reforms, westernization, economic uncertainty, and the large-scale conscription of peasants, restricting the number of samurai employed by the army. Satsuma was the only region to resist being assimilated into the government's new centralized state, and their samurai were especially angry. After all, they had been the government's chief supporters, and this same government was now undoing their way of life. This is when the rebellion took place, with Saigo Takamori as its leader. His rebellion's leadership was sparked by two events. Firstly, students from his samurai academy captured the Kagoshima arsenals in February 1877, which led Takamori to grudgingly support their actions. Secondly, he uncovered a Tokyo-backed plot to assassinate him. He considered the murder plan a sign of the new government's dubious standing and the potential threat against the emperor. Over the ensuing 8-month rebellion, his main objective was to push his way to Tokyo and speak to the emperor, to whom his loyalty remained unshaken. Takamori laid siege to Kumamoto Castle, one of Japan's 3 great fortifications. The country's traditional siege warfare method was to engage the opposing samurai in hand-to-hand combat. Although Western weaponry had been introduced, the samurai ethos preferred this strategy, as did Takamori and his rebels. The walls of the Kumamoto Castle stood 20 meters high and encompassed 49 towers. 6 of these stood on a cliff next to 2 streams that could be dammed into a defensive moat, meaning that the fortification had never been taken before. Not only that, but the defenders simply had to wait for reinforcements from the Imperial army. Many battles took place for 55 days straight. After having failed to take Kumamoto Castle, the rebels fled to the village of Kiyama. This foothold fell on April the 21st. Withdrawing further south, the losses incurred in Kumamoto limited Takamori to guerrilla warfare. Accounts vary, but the rebel forces totaled between 3,500 and 10,000 men by mid-August. The Imperial army achieved a complete victory in the Nobueka rebel stronghold the following day. Takamori's force barely managed to escape. He kept fighting and lost more men with each battle. By September the 23rd, he was down to 40 men. His samurai fled and were hunted down by Imperial soldiers in the nearby hills. During the hail of bullets, Saigo Takamori was maimed and ordered his second-in-command to behead him. His death signaled the end of the Satsuma Rebellion, as well as the symbolic extinction of the samurai class. But why did the samurai lose? The rebels were outnumbered from the start, with insufficient weapons and money. Although the Imperial soldiers were armed with rifles that could fire 6 shots a minute and were backed up by 18 artillery batteries and a convoy of warships, Takamori's samurai still favored traditional weaponry, such as the sword, the bow, and only a few used firearms. One source claimed that the Imperial army had almost 59 million more bullets when the conflict broke out. Saigo Takamori's best chance of success would have been to persuade the government to roll back policies that were harmful to the samurai, rather than trying to secure victory in direct confrontation. His first mistake was failing to capitalize on the rebels' greatest asset, malcontent in other areas. If he had brought in other insurgent groups, his reputation and experience could have sparked a counter-revolution before the Imperial army had time to respond. Disgruntled warriors would also have swelled Takamori's numbers and narrowed the gap with the Imperial soldiers. Several scholars see Takamori's failure as a sign that he underestimated the ability of the government to recruit his soldiers, as did most of his samurai. One of the causes of the Satsuma Rebellion was their outrage at being replaced by peasant conscripts. Takamori's belief that non-samurai were incapable of being good soldiers was one of his death blows. His second blunder was the siege of Kumamoto Castle. He lost time, the element of surprise, manpower, and ammunition, all in exchange for the honor of direct confrontation. It allowed the government time to assemble a response and dispatch reinforcements. The siege of Kumamoto Castle in the early months of the conflict effectively ruined the Satsuma Rebellion's chances of success. Third, and perhaps the most important mistake by Takamori, was the nature of the conflict. Traditional samurai rebelling against the spread of westernization. His men favored katanas over guns out of loyalty to traditional ethics and warfare techniques. The reason the rebels lost was that they were unable to match Western weapons. The Bushido Code and the samurai's willingness to die for their cause only served to undercut their military strategy when outnumbered by a better armed opponent. During a conflict where they were outnumbered in arms and men, the samurai's insistence on the nobility and honor of seppuku drove them to sacrifice themselves. The Satsuma Rebellion largely failed because the rebel spirit magnified their handicaps. Saigo Takamori strongly believed in the Bushido principles of honor and readiness to die for a cause. Several sources believe that one of the main reasons he took on the leadership of the Satsuma Rebellion was so that he could nobly perish in battle. His military strategy, and that of his samurai warriors, was propelled by this goal. They disregarded their gravest material drawbacks, a shortage of manpower and cramped Western weapons, because of Bushido's emphasis on self-sacrifice and the sword. And their spirit emboldened them to overlook the very elements required for success. The Meiji era, which extended from 1868 to 1912, was a pivotal and transformative period in the history of Japan.
The nation underwent a rapid process of modernization and westernization, shedding centuries of isolation and embracing policies and practices that propelled it towards becoming a global power. Prior to the Meiji era, Japan adopted a policy known as sakoku, which effectively isolated the country from external interactions and trade with foreign nations. During the mid-1800s, the global community witnessed the advent of modernity, characterized by significant advancements in various nations. This era was marked by the flourishing of international trade and the introduction of groundbreaking inventions, including the inaugural electric batteries and steam engines. Nevertheless, Japan continued to uphold a feudal system of governance, which lagged significantly behind the progress observed in other parts of the world. However, an important turning point occurred on July 8, 1583, with the arrival of the Perry expedition under the leadership of Commodore Matthew C. Perry from the United States Navy. The primary objective was to facilitate the establishment of trade relations between the United States and Japan. Additionally, it aimed to safeguard the security of American ships navigating the region. In response to the Japanese resistance in signing a trade treaty, Perry ordered issues for his ships to proceed towards the capital of Edo and strategically position their cannons in the direction of the city of Uraga. Also, he fired warning shots from his fleet's 73 cannons, displaying the formidable firepower of his vessels and effectively conveying a direct and unequivocal threat to the Japanese authorities. The arrival of the Perry expedition holds great significance from the Japanese perspective, marking a crucial juncture in the country's history. The arrival of the American ships led by Perry came as a shock to the Japanese government. It was recognized that the nation was experiencing a relative decline in technological and military achievements in comparison to the Western powers. Japan acknowledged the potential repercussions of inadequately addressing the situation and understood the need to modernize its social, political, and economic structures. Considering internal objections and resistance, the Japanese government came to the realization that the sole means of averting foreign occupation was through engaging in negotiations with the Americans. In 1854, following a series of negotiations, the Treaty of Kanagawa was successfully concluded. This pivotal agreement facilitated the entry of American ships into Japanese ports and established a framework for diplomatic relations between both nations. The Perry expedition meant the beginning of a transformative era in Japan. The nation embraced trade and subsequently established diplomatic relations with various Western countries, resulting in significant influences on its culture, politics, and society. The process of modernization in Japan experienced an important jump following the Perry expedition. This was primarily due to the implementation of domestic reforms and the active pursuit of Western knowledge and technology. However, the influx of numerous changes was not universally embraced by the Japanese population. Specifically, the individuals who had derived advantages from the feudal caste system, such as the samurai, expressed discontent. The samurai had traditionally occupied significant roles in Japanese society, serving as court officials and government aristocrats. The influx of new foreign goods and the subsequent rapid transformation of fashion and cuisine in Japanese society were sources of discontent among affluent merchants. The Meiji era began because of the consolidation of a group of feudal lords, referred to as daimyo, hailing from the Satsuma and Choshu regions in the southernmost part of Japan. Their collective goal was to topple the Tokugawa shogunate and reinstate political authority to the emperor. During the period spanning from 1867 to 1868, the shogunate encountered opposition from multiple anti-government factions, along with allegations asserting its inability to adequately equip Japan to confront Western influences. Therefore, the resignation of the final Tokugawa shogun occurred, resulting in the restoration of power to the imperial family. On February 3, 1867, Prince Mutsuhito, who was 14 years old, ascended to the chrysanthemum throne as the 122nd Emperor of Japan, following the passing of his father, Emperor Kome. Under the leadership of Mutsuhito, Japan initiated a comprehensive program aimed at modernizing and adopting Western practices. The emperor implemented a series of political, social, and economic reforms with the aim of bolstering the nation's strength and enhancing its ability to compete with Western powers. The reforms covered the elimination of the class system, the establishment of a centralized government, and the drafting of a constitution. Following this, Mutsuhito assumed the title of Emperor Meiji, a designation that implies enlightened leadership. The start of the Meiji era was officially shaped in 1868. A primary objective of the Meiji government was to consolidate authority at the center and achieve national unity, as the country was previously divided into various feudal domains. To this end, the new administration enacted a succession of administrative reforms that dismantled the feudal system and concentrated power in Tokyo, which was subsequently established as the nation's capital. The Meiji era in Japan was characterized by a significant emphasis on the country's modernization. Drawing inspiration from Western powers, the Japanese government initiated a rapid process of industrialization. This involved the construction of factories, the growth of textile and steel industries, and the establishment of modern transportation systems, including railroads and telegraph lines. Additionally, Japan implemented economic policies that promoted free trade and encouraged the expansion of large-scale production. Education played a pivotal role in facilitating the modernization of the country during the Meiji era. The government recognized the significance of developing a comprehensive public education system that was modeled after the Western approach, with particular emphasis on science, technology, and foreign languages. To further enhance their educational system, Japanese students were sent overseas to gain knowledge in diverse fields, while foreign teachers and specialists were recruited to teach in Japan. The deliberate focus on education and the assimilation of Western knowledge proved instrumental in expediting the rapid modernization of Japan. The need for Japan to modernize its military was undoubtedly paramount during a period marked by European and American imperialism. The country underwent a significant transformation, transitioning from a system where military training was contingent upon being born into a samurai family to one that embraced conscription. To achieve this modernization, Japan sought the expertise of trainers from Western nations, such as France and Prussia, tasked with instructing recruits in contemporary tactics and weaponry at military academies. To help with the transition of Japan's agrarian economy into a developed industrial one, the government implemented different approaches. One such strategy involved sending numerous Japanese scholars overseas to acquire knowledge in Western sciences and languages. Additionally, substantial government investments were made to enhance transportation and communication networks. Plus, the authorities provided direct support to foster the growth of businesses and industries, with particular emphasis on the influential zaibatsus, which encompass large and powerful family enterprises. To achieve stability within the newly formed government, it was necessary for the formal feudal lords to relinquish their land holdings and return them to the emperor. This process was successfully completed by 1870, and, subsequently, the country underwent a restructuring phase, where the previously held fiefs were reorganized into prefectures. The former daimyos, who were feudal lords, transitioned into new political roles and ministries, while the central government assumed responsibility for their administrative expenses. Additionally, salaries were provided to individuals who had previously held the esteemed position of samurai. Nevertheless, despite the progress made during the Meiji Restoration, a considerable number of samurai and nobles expressed discontent with the trajectory of these reforms. Particularly distressing for the samurai was the prohibition on openly carrying their swords, a measure that deeply wounded their sense of honor and pride as esteemed warriors. Consequently, a series of violent uprisings ensued, notably the renowned Satsuma Rebellion, spanning from 1877 to 1878. Spearheaded by samurai hailing from the Satsuma province and led by Saigo Takamori, this rebellion emerged as a direct response to the Meiji government's reform initiatives and the concurrent consolidation of authority. Saigo Takamori, a renowned samurai hailing from Satsuma, played a significant role in the demise of the Tokugawa shogunate and the subsequent Imperial Restoration. Initially, he lent his support to the reforms initiated by the Meiji government. However, over time, he grew progressively dissatisfied with the trajectory of the nation, perceiving a neglect of the cherished principles and values upheld by the samurai class. In 1876, Saigo Takamori made the decision to relinquish all his official positions and subsequently returned to his birthplace in Satsuma. It was in this location that he kicked off a rebellion aimed at challenging the authority of the central government. The uprising itself started in January 1877, when Saigo's forces launched an assault against the imperial government. The rebels, consisting primarily of samurai warriors, engaged in a sequence of intense battles against the Meiji government's military forces. Despite facing numerical and technological drawbacks, the Satsuma rebels managed to achieve some initial success. Nevertheless, the Meiji government responded by mobilizing its national army, gradually overpowering the insurrection. In September 1877, following months of intense and violent conflict, Saigo's forces suffered a decisive defeat at the Battle of Shiroyama. Tragically, Saigo Takamori perished on the battlefield, marking the culmination of the rebellion. Despite their defeat, the rebels' assistance served as a testament to the unwavering determination of the samurai warriors and their opposition to the reforms initiated by the Meiji government. After the insurrection, the Meiji government took steps to foster reconciliation and assimilation of the samurai into the newly established social structure, with the aim of preventing future conflicts. Moreover, the rebellion had a profound impact on Japan's historical perspective, prompting a reassessment of the samurai's societal role. During the Meiji era, Japan not only implemented internal reforms, but also assumed a more prominent position in the global arena. The nation underwent a series of military transformations, aligning its armed forces with Western standards. These efforts reached their pinnacle with Japan's triumph over China in the First Sino-Japanese War, 1894 to 1895, and Russia in the Russo-Japanese War, 1904 to 1905. These victories strengthened Japan's status as an essential military force within the region. The Meiji government's unwavering commitment to modernization and westernization played a crucial role in establishing the groundwork for Japan's subsequent development during the 20th century, leaving a lasting impact that endures to this day. The influence of the Meiji era permeates every element of Japanese society, including economics, politics, culture, and technology. Furthermore, its significance extends beyond national boundaries, serving as a source of inspiration for admirers and scholars worldwide.
Have you ever asked yourself how the Japanese succeeded in controlling a large swath of the Pacific during World War II, despite facing enemies many times their size? The Imperial Japanese Army, apart from the bravery of its soldiers, had modern weapons that tipped the balance of battle in their favor. Today's video reveals some of the weapons in the Japanese arsenal that were behind the Japanese conquest of the Far East. The Arisaka rifle was one of the most significant and iconic rifles Japan used during the first half of the 20th century, including the Second World War. It was named after its designer, Colonel Nariakira Arisaka, and the Type 38 was introduced in 1905. The rifle was comparatively small in relation to other rifles of the time. This gave it a lighter recoil, and it was easier to handle, particularly important for Japanese soldiers who, on average, were shorter in stature than their Western opponents. It was also known for its accuracy and reliability in harsh conditions. Its manufacturing quality was high, with painstaking details. This was the standard rifle of the Imperial Japanese Army during the Sino-Japanese Wars, the First World War, and the beginning of World War II. The Type 38 rifle was replaced in 1939 by the Type 99, designed to match the needs of a modern battlefield. The Type 99 was manufactured in copious quantities and in various versions during the war, including simplified models produced by the end of it due to limited resources. The Nambu pistol is one of Japan's most unique firearms produced during the 20th century. Named after its designer, General Kijiro Nambu, this semi-automatic pistol was used by the Japanese armed forces prior to and during the Second World War. The Nambu was notable for its distinctive design and features. The Nambu pistol had two main models, the Type 14 and the Type 94. The former, introduced in 1925, was the most widespread and recognizable. The Type 94, launched in 1934, was smaller and had a slightly unique design. Most Nambu pistols used an 8x22mm Nambu cartridge, itself less powerful compared to contemporary European or American pistol ammunition. The Nambu was renowned for its elegant and ergonomic design, with a long, thin handle that fit nicely in the hand. It resembled the Luger P08 pistol, a clear influence on Nambu's design. The Japanese Type 100 submachine gun was the only mass-produced weapon of its kind in Japan during World War II. Brought into service in the late 1930s and introduced in 1942,
The Type 100 was a Japanese effort to modernize its infantry weaponry to better match the Allied armed forces. Its introduction was a direct response to the efficiency of the submachine guns used by other nations in the conflict. The firing rate varied between versions, but was typically around 500 rounds per minute. The effective range was short, typical of submachine guns of the time. The weapon had a simple and sturdy design, featuring a long barrel and a wooden stock. The design simplicity was aimed at facilitating mass production and maintenance in field conditions. The Type 100 was first used in the Pacific Theater, where Japanese forces engaged in intense combat in jungles and on islands. It was especially suited to close range and close quarters combat. The Type 92 heavy machine gun was a key piece in the arsenal of the Imperial Japanese Army during World War II. It was first introduced in 1932 and was designed as the Japanese Army's main heavy machine gun, used for a wide range of roles, from defending positions to providing fire support for infantry attacks. The Type 92 used a 7.7mm Arisaka cartridge, a larger caliber compared to the light machine guns of the time, providing greater firepower. It worked with a tape feed system, allowing it to fire for longer times. It was air-cooled, making it lighter and more mobile than water-cooled machine guns. It was generally operated by a squad of 3 to 4 soldiers and mounted on a tripod, providing a wide firing arc and stability for continuous firing. The Type 92 machine gun had a significant role in Japanese combat strategies, offering vital support in many major battles. The Type 97 hand grenade was the primary hand grenade used by the Imperial Japanese Army during World War II. Introduced in 1937, this grenade was a critical component of the Japanese infantry's arsenal, meant to be an effective weapon in trench combat and urban warfare. It was a fragmentation grenade, aimed at inflicting damage by scattering metal shrapnel upon detonation. It was ignited by a time fuse, set in motion by pulling a safety pin, and hitting the grenade's base against a solid surface to start the fuse burning. While an effective weapon in theory, the grenade had some design shortcomings. The ignition method, requiring the soldier to strike the grenade, could be risky. Owing to its potentially dangerous nature, the effective use of the Type 97 required training and caution from the soldiers. The Type 97 hand grenade was a key element in the Japanese infantry arsenal during the Second World War, echoing the abilities and limitations of Japanese military technology at the time. The Kyugunto sword was used by Japanese officers until the very end of World War II. Kyugunto literally means old military sword in Japanese. These swords mark a momentous transition in Japan's military history, blending traditional Japanese elements with Western influences. The Kyugunto design combined traditional Japanese sword styles, such as the katana, with features of Western swords, especially sabers. This hybrid reflected the modernization of the Japanese armed forces and the adoption of Western military practices during the Meiji era and after. The blades ranged significantly in quality and style. Some were reused katana blades, fitted into new grips and sheaths, while others were new Western designs. Apart from being practical weapons, the Kyugunto were a symbol of status and honor for the officers. They indicated rank and prestige within the armed forces and encapsulated the warrior spirit of the ancient samurai. The Type 96 light machine gun was an essential weapon in the Imperial Japanese Army's arsenal during World War II. First introduced in 1936, this light machine gun was intended to improve the firepower of Japanese infantry units, drawing on previous designs and adding technological breakthroughs. Partly inspired by the French Hotchkiss light machine gun and tailored to meet the specific needs of the Japanese Army, the Type 96 was renowned for its robust and reliable design. The machine gun fired 6.5mm Arisaka cartridges, the same caliber as the Arisaka Type 38, making ammunition logistics easier. It was prized for its lightness and ease of transportation, plus its reliability in difficult conditions, something essential on various specific fronts. The Type 96 performed a decisive role in Japan's infantry combat tactics, being one of the mainstays of fire support for the troops during the war. The Type 97 sniper rifle was the primary precision rifle for the Imperial Japanese Army snipers during World War II. First introduced in 1937, the design was based on the Arisaka Type 38 rifle, but with specific changes for the long-range precision role, such as adding a telescopic sight, which generally had a 2.5x magnification.
It also had a heavier barrel and trigger, adjusted to ensure greater accuracy in long-range shooting. The rifle used the same 6.5 Arisaka cartridge as the Type 38 rifle, renowned for its accuracy and flat trajectory. Like many other armies of the time, the Japanese military started to value snipers more as the war progressed, acknowledging their crucial role in specific combat situations, enabling them to invest significantly in training and improving their equipment. The Type 30 bayonet was the gold standard bayonet used by Japan's armed forces, particularly during World War II. First introduced in 1897, this bayonet was designed to be mounted on a variety of Japanese rifles, including the famous Arisaka rifles. The steel blade was straight, with a sharp single edge and a pointed tip. Its design was sturdy and effective for both lunges and slashes. The handle was usually wooden, with a metal crosspiece serving as a handguard. It came with a metal sheath to protect the blade and make it easier to carry. It was also used as a trench knife and as an all-purpose tool by Japanese soldiers. On August 15, 1945, Emperor Hirohito broke the silence in a radio communication where he asked the Japanese people to endure the unendurable, Japan's unconditional surrender. What made Hirohito prefer peace, even though he had remained silent, or worse, had been complicit with Japanese militarism during Japan's 14 years of aggression? The natural answer is the devastating impact of the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki on August 6 and 9, 1945, respectively. This analysis is unambiguous and ignores the decisive factor: the entry of the USSR into the war on August 9, 1945, 3 days after Hiroshima and a few hours before Nagasaki. The Red Army's sweeping invasion of Manchuria and the largest offensive of World War II jeopardized Japan's plans for an honorable surrender. To shed light on Japan's complex surrender, we must look at a few facts. In February 1945, at the Yalta Conference, the Soviet leader reaffirmed his plans. The USSR would confront Japan 3 months after the end of operations in Europe, giving the Red Army enough time to mobilize troops in Manchuria. In April, when the Nazi army was on the verge of absolute meltdown, Stalin broke the non-aggression pact signed with Japan in 1941. In May, Stalin began transferring to the Far East the military corps that had defeated Germany. In 1945, at the Potsdam Conference, US President Harry Truman told Stalin that the atomic bomb was ready and that they would use it against Japan. But the president did not believe the bomb would end the war and asked the USSR to enter the conflict as soon as possible. Stalin agreed, as he did not want to be left out of the division of the Far East either. By early August 1945, the Red Army was ready. Within 3 months, more than 1.5 million soldiers had crossed Siberia and massed on the border of Manchukuo, a puppet state created by the Japanese military in 1932. Never had the Red Army gathered so many resources. By then, Japanese power was but a shadow of the past. The archipelago was isolated. However, they have one remaining asset, Manchuria, a rich region that had been conquered from China. This territory was outside the radius of American bombers and therefore freed from attack. The archipelago could be invaded, many lives would be lost, but Japan would remain neutral in the war thanks to Manchuria's raw materials. Even with the USSR entering the conflict, the Japanese objective was to weaken them, not to fight them, as they were trying to do with the Americans in the Pacific. Japan did not intend to defeat its opponent, but to make it retreat due to an unsustainable number of human losses. Against this backdrop, on August 9, 1945, at 4 o'clock in the morning, the Red Army began the offensive. The Japanese tried to block the Red Army's advance, or at least to slow it down, but they failed miserably. With no weapons against the strong Soviet tanks, the soldiers threw themselves against the tracks of the armored vehicles, carrying mines or dynamite charges in their bodies. These sacrifices were futile, and the Japanese army collapsed. Manchuria was quickly conquered by the Soviets. This loss was a disaster for Japan, as the Red Army was able to join the archipelago invasion that the Americans had planned for the spring of 1946. Politically, it was also a major setback. With Stalin's intervention, the honorable peace desired by Japan was lost. Stalin was seen by the Japanese as an heir to the Tsarist Empire, in other words, a dangerous rival in the contest for hegemony in Northeast Asia. This dispute had begun with the Russo-Japanese War in 1904, and continued throughout the first half of the 20th century. By early 1945, it was clear that Japan would not be able to sustain the American momentum, but Japanese endurance remained stubborn. The Battle of Okinawa was clear proof. It took 82 days of grueling fighting between April and June 1945 for the Americans to emerge victorious on this southern island. The balance of the conquest was bloody, 14,000 dead and 50,000 wounded among the Allies. These heavy losses prompted the United States to move on to an even more brutal stage in the air war against Japan, the atomic bomb. But American forces did not believe that this weapon would prevent troops from being deployed, fearing a campaign with many human losses on their side. Tokyo refused to surrender. Even after the bombing of Hiroshima, Japan's top brass did not meet until 3 days later, leading one to believe that surrender was not an urgent matter. The Japanese elite was deeply divided. The court internalized the idea that the war was lost, and the circle close to the emperor wanted to sacrifice the empire gained since the end of the 19th century to ensure the crown's salvation. The court's priority was to preserve Kokutai, the mystical religious organization embodied by the emperor and the ultimate justification of the entire political system. But what was the population's opinion? Well, the people increasingly disapproved of the sovereign. The signs were obvious, in demonstrations that accused the emperor of being responsible for the disasters that struck the country. It was necessary to end the war to save Hirohito. But the conflict was not to end by any means. The emperor would not commit suicide, like Hitler, nor would he be lynched, murdered, and paraded in a public square like Mussolini. On the other hand, the military still believed that Japan was invincible, as it retained part of China and all of Manchuria. Nevertheless, a ceasefire would be possible under 4 conditions. First, the preservation of the monarchy. Second, the Allies could not intervene in Japanese demobilization. Third, Japan could not be occupied by the Allies. Fourth, officers accused of war crimes were to be tried by Japanese military courts. Japan's maritime geography and Manchuria hampered the US blockade. Even if attacked with atomic bombs, the empire could remain active in the war longer, causing the deaths of thousands of civilians and military personnel. The Soviet invasion of Manchuria was a relief to Washington and a terror to Tokyo. American strategists felt that the Soviets' entry into the war had a greater effect than the 2 atomic bombs. We know little about the reactions in the Imperial Palace to Hiroshima's destruction, the Soviet maelstrom, and Nagasaki's bombing. But these 3 events in a short space of time gave Hirohito's close circle convincing arguments to demand that the military lay down its arms. Saving the throne required reinventing its ruler. From a bellicose military leader unconcerned with his subjects' fate, Hirohito was transformed during these decisive days into a benevolent pacifist, a captive of a group of extremists. After a day's hesitation, Hirohito ordered the keeper of the imperial seal and the closest advisor to draft a decree to end the war. The final text was submitted on the evening of August 14, 1945, to Hirohito, who read it over the radio the next day at noon. In the text, USSR's invasion is mentioned subtly, while the atomic bomb was explicitly named. Hirohito said, "In order to save human civilization from complete extinction, Japan surrenders, even though that word was not pronounced." In the end, Japan surrendered on the terms it wanted. According to Bruno Biroli's essay, the Soviet invasion of Manchuria was one of the decisive factors for the emperor to accept the surrender. If he didn't, he would lose his crown, and Japan could have been occupied militarily, ending up divided between the USSR and the United States, as had happened with Germany. For the United States, Japan's surrender was the best possible outcome. It allowed them to avoid another 2 years of war, save over 1 million lives, test atomic bombs on 2 cities, and, on top of that, keep Japan away from Soviet influence. But why do we keep talking so much about the atomic bombs, with barely a mention of the Soviet invasion of Manchuria? Well, even before the end of the conflict, the history of World War II was already being rewritten. The week after the surrender, the Prime Minister admitted in Parliament that the USSR's declaration of war had put the country in the worst possible situation. At the same time, the head of the transitional government revived the myth that the atomic bomb was the sole cause of Japan's defeat. It was to save Japan and its people from these horrific nukes that Hirohito ordered the weapons to be laid down, all in the interests of peace and humanity. Over the years, this narrative grew stronger. However, downplaying the USSR's role was also politically driven. Acknowledging the merits of the Red Army would mean ascribing to the Russians a stake in rearranging Japanese society. The Cold War arrived earlier in Asia than in Europe, sparking a military clash in China and then in Korea. Emphasizing the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and absolving Hirohito was essential to turn Japan into the backbone of the American defense system, and so it was. Have you ever heard of Shinigami? These are mysterious and mesmerizing characters from Japanese culture, often featured in anime stories, manga, and legends. The word Shinigami can be roughly translated as gods of death or spirits of death. Essentially then, Shinigami are like guardians of the underworld. They're not necessarily scary. They have unique and interesting personalities in many stories. But don't just think of them as villains. They play an especially key role in Japanese culture. They are responsible for guiding the souls of people who have passed to the next world. The Shinigami are tasked with making sure that the souls of people who have perished are guided correctly to the spirit world. They do not bring about death, but appear when it is time for a soul to leave. Think of them as guides or messengers between our world and the next. They also bear responsibility for keeping the balance between life and death. This implies that they need to make sure that everything happens as it should, without interference or mistakes. In some stories, the Shinigami may even have books or lists with the names of people whose time to go is drawing near, so that they can be ready to guide them. Some may be shrewd and kind, while others may be mischievous or mysterious. This variety can make the stories of Shinigami interesting, as each of them can have an unusual way of dealing with their responsibilities. Shinigami were not initially depicted as physical entities in Japanese literature. They were more conceptual, often associated with death and fate, but not personified as specific characters. This more abstract nature reflected the traditional Japanese view of death as a natural and inescapable process, without the need for a specific agent to cause it. As Japanese literature and theater developed during the Edo and Meiji periods, the Shinigami started to be portrayed more tangibly. They were often connected with stories of tragic deaths, acting as entities that influenced or led individuals to meet their end. Interaction with the West during the Meiji period and later brought many cultural and social changes to Japan. This also influenced the concept of Shinigami, possibly inspired by Western representations of death or the Grim Reaper. The Shinigami started to be seen as specific death gods or spirits. This development reflects the blending of traditional Japanese beliefs and ideas with Western concepts. Among the most well-known tales from them is the story of one Shinigami who came across a desperate man who was trying to reach death. But the Shinigami told him that life is like a candle and is only extinguished when it burns out, and that the candle representing the man's life still had a long way to burn. To encourage the man, the Shinigami taught him how to ward off death by driving away other Shinigami so that he could earn some money and change his life. But the man soon gets greedy as he is earning a lot of money with this new power and ends up burning the life candle even faster, dying just when he wanted to live the most. Whereas death in the West is often seen as something to be dreaded, traditional Japanese beliefs regard it as a normal part of the life cycle. Shinigami are seen as agents who maintain this natural cycle. Different from the Grim Reaper, who is often depicted as a terrifying entity wielding a scythe and the embodiment of death itself, the Shinigami's role is to ensure that people die at the appointed time. Despite his often frightening appearance, the Shinigami has no intentions of scaring the dying. He tries to calm them down and leads them peacefully to the other spiritual realm. Shinigami have been completely reshaped into complex and often charismatic figures in the 20th century, and especially at the beginning of the 21st, with the rise of media such as manga and anime. A notable example is the Death Note series, where the Shinigami are depicted as powerful beings who manipulate life and death, with their own distinct personalities and motivations. This modern portrayal contrasts strongly with more traditional representations and reflects the growing influence of popular culture on mythology and folklore. Japanese folklore is full of kami and yokai of all kinds. Some of those supernatural creatures are truly terrifying.
Others are benevolent and praiseworthy, but there are several that are quite funny. Today you will meet some of the most fantastic and curious creatures in Japanese mythology. This video is brought to you by Boxu. If you are a fan of Japanese culture like me, now you will be able to get a taste of Japan. Boxu is a snack box that contains the most authentic snacks from the most different regions of Japan. By subscribing to this service, you will receive a themed box containing the most diverse goodies at home every month. The snacks and box themes change every month, leaving no room for monotony. They have a huge variety of snacks, and you will have an exotic and tasty experience with the most authentic Japanese snacks, many of them with more than a century of tradition. As a fan of peppers, I love the Ishigaki-jima, which is a spicy snack straight from the Okinawa Islands. With your box, you will also get a booklet where you can find a lot of information about each of the snacks, so you can learn more about them, and you may end up discovering that you are now a fan of some typical ingredient of Japanese cuisine. This month's box is extra special, as it celebrates the Japanese cherry blossoms bloom season, with limited edition items and cherry blossom themed snacks from all over Japan. Anyone who subscribes to Boxu during the month of March will receive Sakura season as their first box. Use my code and link to get 10% off your own authentic Japanese snack subscription from Boxu. Don't miss out on this delicious snack journey through Japan. Kitsunes is one of the most common Asian folklore creatures. The Japanese version of kitsune is regarded as a benevolent and cunning creature, like all foxes. They were known as Zenko, the goddess Inari's messengers. Yako were malicious foxes and could harm human beings. According to some legends, they assumed the form of a beautiful woman and attempted to wed men from good families, or even married for true love, being able to maintain human form for indefinite amounts of time. If one of these foxes reached the age of 100, it grew a second tail, and its magical abilities would reach a new level. After 1,000 years of life, the fox would become a Kyubi no Kitsune, the famous nine-tailed fox, reaching an almost godlike status. Konoha Tengu lived in the mountains near Shinto temples and usually played tricks on unsuspecting monks, or would chastise the misbehavior of anyone who had committed bad acts. The Tengus were martial arts masters, particularly in the use of swords, and could defeat the most skilled samurais themselves without using any of their powers. The ability to fly, to blow strong gusts of wind with their wings, to teleport, to shapeshift into the form of humans or animals, and even to enter the dreams of mortals to conjure up nightmares or bring forth premonitions were amongst the abilities the Tengus possessed. The ninjas fueled the legends about the Tengus and were often compared to them. The ability to disappear in the blink of an eye and accomplish things that would have seemed impossible led many to believe that these shinobi were true Tengus. The Wanyudo are frightening yokai. These creatures bear the resemblance of a giant head attached to a burning ox cartwheel. According to some legends, this head belonged to a sinful monk or a terrible and tyrannical daimyo who became a yokai to pay for his sins in life. His purpose is to serve in hell, and he derives great pleasure from the suffering of the spirits that go there. Some legends say that he is also responsible for warding the gates of hell. The Wanyudo patrols the roads of the mortal world, looking for sinners to draw their spirits to hell. Therefore, when its wheel is spotted or heard, people usually run away from the roads and hide. The sight of this terrible yokai can be enough to destroy a life. The Kappa is one of the most famous and feared yokai in Japanese culture. This amphibious humanoid creature with a turtle shell, scaly skin, and a hole in its head filled with water is part of many tales and legends. It lived in lakes, streams, and swamps, attacking anyone who came near its territory, mainly children, women, and fishermen. These beings were strong, but lost that power if they ran out of water in the hole over their heads, and could die if they ran out of water for too long. These beings were often considered evil, but in some tales they are just mischievous and tricky. Cucumber is said to be one of their favorite meals. Therefore, festivals were organized with offerings of cucumbers to the kappas to soothe the spirit of these yokais. The komainu are the famous lion dogs of Japanese folklore, commonly found at the entrance to Shinto temples. The komainu are fierce and noble beasts. They act as guard dogs and prevent evil spirits from entering temples or houses. They are depicted as stone or wooden statues. They always form a pair, a male and a female. The male always has his mouth open, showing his sharp teeth. His function is to protect the outside of the building. The female, on the other hand, always has her mouth closed, protecting the inside. Legend says that if the komainu detects the presence of a spirit or of an evil yokai, it frees itself from its statue form and fiercely defends its territory.
We have covered different yokai and their diverse forms, but some are truly exotic, like Karakase Obake, who is a yokai that emerges from an umbrella that turns 99 years old. He then goes on to have a single eye, a mouth with a large tongue, and a leg in place of a hurdle. Despite scaring children and ladies, they are harmless and disappear soon after being spotted, but not without a good laugh. The bakezori is a ghost sandal. According to Japanese folklore, these utensil-shaped yokai can dash around the house, and the sound of their footsteps frightens the residents. When the owner of a pair of sandals would lose one of them for no reason, it is believed that the bakezori can become bored and, in search for further excitement, leaving its owner barefoot.
The Oni is a demonic creature from Japanese folklore. He is a yokai, similar to the trolls or ogres of Western culture. A large, strong, and very scary creature. His most common color is red, but he can also display other colors. The Oni spend their days in hell, tormenting and torturing the souls of mortals who head there. On the mortal plane, these creatures enjoy the taste of human flesh. For this reason, Onis were greatly feared, for their mere presence was a sign of bad luck. One of the Oni's favorite weapons is the kanabo, a kind of iron-tipped club. The Onis are one of the most common yokais in Japanese culture. They are in literature, theater, and of course, anime and manga. In ancient Japan, when a man disappeared in the snow, it was customary to blame Yuki Onna. She is a yokai in the form of a very seductive young woman. When a man walks in the snow at night, he may encounter Yuki Onna, and if he is attracted by her singing or calling, his fate is sealed. In some versions, they were vampire-like creatures, able to suck the life energy from their victims. In others, they draw the person away from their destiny, causing them to get lost in the snow or distract them until they freeze. In the coldest winters, the terrible yokai would invade the homes of humble people and freeze all the residents. Yuki Onna symbolizes the dangers of winter, warning the people to always be vigilant against the risks of the harsh winters.
The Kirin is a sacred yokai from Japanese folklore. It has a horse-like body, but covered with scales like a dragon, with a pair of deer-like horns. His mane, horsehair, and tail are all aflame, but in spite of its impressive appearance, it is a benevolent and quiet being. This creature's apparitions are extremely rare and usually precede the coming of an enlightened ruler. For this reason, they are a harbinger of good things to come. The Kirin is not capable of harming any creature. Hence, some legends tell that the creature glides over the grass so as not to harm the plants. The Kirin can sometimes appear to have a single horn, which is why it is also called the Asian unicorn. These animals are portrayed on statues in front of temples as symbols of protection and good luck.